Okay. All right, we'll come back into session now and go on with the agenda as published. Let me just ask, does anyone have any announcements or reports before we move on to the findings of fact? No? All right, if there are none, then let's go on to the findings of fact. The first one is Daniel and Tamara Squire. This is from October 20th of this year. It was a minor subdivision. I think all of you were sent this in the packet or given it in the packet at the last meeting. Does anybody have any additions, corrections, emendations? Hearing none, could I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, the next one is RB Homes. This is from October 6th of this year. This was a major site plan with variances from 203, 205 Nassau Street, Block 4702, Lot 19. Any additions, corrections, emendations? Anyone?
I'll move it.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. If there are no further additions, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Now, you have 3 sets of minutes in your package. Let's start with the regular meeting of, this is April 7th of this year. Those who were present were Julie, David, Jenny, myself, Liz, and Gail, so.
I'll move to accept, David.
I'm sorry?
I'll move to accept.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. The next one is the regular meeting of May 5th of this year. And those who were present were David, Jenny, myself, Liz, Tim, Mildred, Gail, and Dwayne. And Julie, yes. Any additions, corrections?
I'll move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And the last set of minutes is from April 7th of this year. Those who were present were Julie, David, Jenny.
Wait, I think we did that one. Yeah.
Okay, April 21. I have 2 sets of April 7th, sorry. Okay, so you can read off the top of yours whether you were here or not. Any additions or corrections? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Did somebody,
Nobody moved.
no, nobody's, how about somebody?
I'll move
I
it.
move approval,
I'll
or
second.
second, whatever.
approving?
The minutes of April 24th, it came to you by, 21st, by email,
Oh.
which I'm sure you
Oh.
would have.
Okay, if you didn't get them and want to abstain, anybody else not get them?
I got them.
Okay, so who moved it?
Several, I did.
Okay, Ms. Ullman, who seconded it? Anyone?
I'll second.
Thank you. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Now, let's move on to the discussion item. This was an ordinance referral amending the calculation of prevailing setback of porches and garages, and floor area ratio. And this is sent from council to the board for compliance with the master plan, among other things. Let me ask Mr. Solo if he'd like to walk us through this and show us pictures and so on.
Thank you. If we could have the screen turned. Can you hear me okay, or did this die?
Not very well.
Thank you and good evening. What I'd like to do is give you a little bit of background. I'm going to run through a brief slide presentation to provide some of that background and walk you through the ordinance. You may remember that this past spring, both the Planning Board and Council formed a neighborhood character and zoning initiative, which was a community planning effort to address concerns raised by many residents about the impacts of home development activities on the character of their neighborhood. The goal of the initiative is to develop strategies, policies, guidelines, and regulations to shape future home construction activities so that the outcomes complement the traditional character and form of different neighborhoods. The Neighborhood Character Task Force held a series of public meetings to discuss home development activities. They had 3 specific focus groups with professionals from the area, residents, and then we invited all the boards and commissions that look at residential construction in the town to also comment. Out of that came understanding that there's a need for some short-term, mid-term, and long-term projects to address some of these concerns. What we're going to focus on tonight are some of the more immediate ones that there seem to be consensus on. So let me give you a little bit of background. As you can see from the slide that's up there, a lot of what we heard was that the newer construction dwarfs, is out of character, is much larger than the existing homes in the area. And as you can see from, I'm going to show you just a series of photos where what was really happening is you had 2 to 2.5 story homes appearing in neighborhoods where the pattern was 1 story or 1.5, and the homes were usually much larger. So you can see throughout the town we were seeing these 2.5 story homes up against 1 story, and a lot of people felt it was changing the character of their neighborhood. Just a couple more to sort of cycle through where you can see the impact. These 2 are the one on the left is particularly good at showing sort of the ranch next to the 2.5 story colonial type house. So out of that came the motivation for an ordinance amendment to deal with some of the homes that were out of character. We received a lot of comments about garages being out front or garages being the dominant feature, concerns about paved lawn and mature trees relating both to the removal of that and the size of the house or the regrading of the house. And finally that, as I indicated, the homes were much larger than the neighboring homes. Our consultant shared this slide at, I think, almost all of the focus groups, and I thought it would be useful to share with the full board. And on the left is a home, typical home from 1973, and on the right, a typical home for 2014. And what they found, and these are national numbers, was that in 1973, the average house size was around 1,600 square feet, and in 2014, that average house size is now just a little over 2,600 square feet. The average household size has decreased slightly. The square foot per person in that house has increased dramatically, almost doubling to 1,046. There are now more 4 bedrooms. In 73, only 23% of the homes being built had 4 bedrooms. In 2014, 46%. The number of bathrooms has also increased with more than 2% in 73, where only 19%, and more than 2 bathrooms are now 66%. And similar numbers for a 2-car garage, 39% of the homes had it in 73, and 85% had it in 2014. So even nationally it shows that the homes are larger. If you recall just the pictures I had up, a lot of those homes were probably circa 73 or even older, so that they were smaller homes, and the demand seems to be bigger and bigger homes. We also asked the consultant, and this is a slide that they presented at some of the various meetings, and I thought it's useful information to sort of set the tone. This map shows you each dot represents a home demolition between 2005 and 2015. There were a total of 213 homes that were demolished during that time period. And what the 2 circles are showing you is that there's a large cluster on the right where most of those homes that were being demolished were in the smaller lot area zones. So they were a ½ acre or less, and you'll see as we go into the ordinance and if we continue into the study area, Most of the smaller lots are what's affected, that as you got further and further out into the township, you'll see there's a scattering of homes that were demolished, but the issues were not the same. When you get an acre of land or 3 acres of land, the size of the house was not a problem. They're not in as close. They're not directly affecting their neighborhood. There was also a small but significant cluster in the Edgarstone neighborhood off to the south part of the community. In addition to looking at demolitions, the consultant also plotted single-family home additions by size, and you can see that the scatter of these homes is such that they also mirror to a large extent where the demolitions were occurring. There were 355 additions that we tracked, and I just want to share with you approximately 169 of the homes had placed an addition of 500 to 1,000 square feet on their home. 110 of the homes had 1,001 square feet to 2,000 square foot addition, so in some cases almost doubling the size of the home that was on the lot. And then 76 of them had an addition greater than 2,000. So we're seeing a lot of additions as well in the same part of the neighborhood. And that's a total of 355. To understand some of the numbers, the 2015 American Family Census status indicates that there are approximately 7,762 one- and two-family units in the Princeton community. So when you combine the additions with the tear-downs, we're getting close to 7 to 10% range in terms of the number of homes that are being affected. Not a huge number, but a significant number, I think. So planning ahead, what we're going to talk about in a moment is some changes to building form. And the ordinance will address car first, garage locations. It'll look at prevailing front setback. It will also look at floor area, cathedral ceiling space. And then there was a lot of discussion on porches and the importance of porches, and we'll talk a little bit about them and sort of making our zoning more friendly, or our pro-porch rules. In the future, there will be updates to the land use element of the master plan. There may be specific design guidelines. We will be outlining the potential regulatory approaches on bulk control, some more zoning amendments as we build consensus on the various ones. We will look at whether or not we want to do some sort of form-based code. The study will keep going and look at permitting review and the oversight process, and then some economic strategies as well. As part of the consultant's charge, they will be looking at the economics of the tear-down phenomena and why some of that is occurring. There is some information on the webpage, the Neighborhood Character and Zoning Initiative webpage as well. But we'll be coming back to you with a draft report, hopefully early next year, that begins to outline some of these things. So with that, I'd like to turn to what the ordinance does, and as I said, there were 4 items that we were trying to address, and what I'd like to do is just share with you some pictures as we talk about it. But again, we're going to be dealing with prevailing front setback, porches, garages, and then cathedral space as it affects floor area ratio. So Section 1 of the ordinance amends the Township Code to require the use of a prevailing front setback for lots that are half acre or less. So where it's going to apply is in the R5, 6, 7, and 8, 9 zones. Those are all residential zones that require less than a half acre or less of land. In all of those zones, there's currently a 25-foot front setback, and then I'll talk about Section 4 in the ordinance when we get to it, but that provides the calculations. So the pictures that I've chosen, as you can see on the left, here's a house. It couldn't use prevailing front setback. It meets the 25-foot setback, and as you can see, the house immediately next to it is up much closer, and this is what prevailing front setback would get at. The photograph on the right shows you a fairly typical streetscape in what we're trying to do, so that when the front setback is too large or if it's too small, what we're trying to do is preserve some streetscape and get some uniformity in there. Here's an example under construction where the applicant actually did come and get a variance, but it's still set back. It still took them more time, and again, you can see this time on the right is where the new home is being built, set back a little further as opposed to the prevailing, and on the left shows you going down the street again what the prevailing would look like. And again, just the same picture. I'll come back to that in a minute. So that's why we're looking at doing the prevailing front setback. Section 2 of the ordinance creates a new residential design regulations in the former borough and township land use code. This would permit porches to encroach into the front yard setback, and it says that it can do that a maximum of 8 feet, provided the porch does not exceed 200 square feet, or that's an 8 by 25 foot wide porch, so it's a substantial porch. The majority of the structures on the block must also have porches, so you can't just be the only house and say, I want to put a porch and have it encroach. It's really to allow, as you saw from some of the earliest slides, and I'll show you a few more, many of our neighborhoods have porches, and what this would do is allow for that encroachment. We heard from many neighbors that it's the porches that help to make the neighborhood character, and we'd like to assist them with that. So we have a couple of pictures just showing you porches in the neighborhood, and the residents in the community identified trying to encourage new development to have porches. We also felt, if you look at the slide on the left on this one, that porches help to soften some of the mass of a building by having that porch out in front. It's still a big structure, but at a staff level, we felt that encouraging porches would help with softening some of that. The next section, or this section, also deals with regulating the placement of garages and requires that all new front entry garages be either flush or set back from the front facade of the dwelling. And what we're trying to do is reduce the dominance of garages in terms of residential construction. So on the left are a couple of homes where the garages are at the setback. It's all you see. You don't see a front door. On the right is a more typical. The garage is flush or slightly recessed. And it clearly reduces the dominance of the feeling of the garage. A couple more examples at the top. You'll see in many of the older homes, the garage was built right into the home. On the left is a house where the garage is about 4 feet forward, showing you, while not as dominant as the first slide, it does sort of stick out more and has more of a prominence. On the bottom right is a house with a double garage, but it's equal with a house and not quite as prominent. Throughout the town, there are a lot of different types of garages. There are a lot of different types of setbacks. And what this would do is set a new pattern where they would have to be flush or set back. They could no longer be forward, as in the one on the left. In terms of cathedral floor, need to back up. So Section 3 in the ordinance deletes the existing borough regulation which allowed porches to encroach in the front yard. It was limited to a very small porch, and in the back section of the ordinance, what we're going to do now is, hopefully with the creation in Section 2 of those new design guidelines, we will add to those over the coming years as we develop more and more design solutions. Section 4 of the ordinance simply provides the standards for calculating the mean prevailing setback that we talked about in the beginning section. We're modifying it slightly from what the ordinance said. We're hopefully simplifying it from what it was before. Basically, just a couple of points. We'll now look at 500 feet in either direction on the same side of the street in terms of within the same zone, determining the prevailing front setback. It does allow, when you use the mean prevailing front setback, a plus or minus 2 feet, because we're not locking somebody into a build-to line, and we are providing a little bit of flexibility, realizing that it's an averaging number. So we're still giving them a plus or minus 2 feet in which to do that as well. And just a couple of pictures on that. So Section 5 amends the Borough Code for mean prevailing, and as you go through it, you'll see we've deleted some and added some of this newer language in an attempt to hopefully simplify it, but to allow for mean prevailing. There are a couple of other calculations. On some of the smaller streets where you only have 2, 4, 3 homes, there is sometimes no mean prevailing, and we wanted to recognize that and allow for the homeowner to choose where the setback would be if you have 3 homes and one is very close to the street and one is far back, rather than saying you have to be in the middle. Now you have 3 properties that really don't have any kind of streetscape or sense, that the homeowner would match one or the other, again, with a plus or minus 2 feet. And then finally, Section 6 deals with cathedral space and floor area. And what this does is modify the definition of floor area in the former township to include cathedral space in the floor area, being any space with a ceiling height of 12 feet or greater is counted twice. And Section 7 does the same thing for the borough. And just looking at the slides here, what we're trying to do is, under the current ordinance, if you look here where the cathedral space is, or down here, similarly, or over here on this new house under construction in here, there are some small pockets where we're adding to the bulk of the structure, the mass of the structure, and because it's whether it's 12 feet or 20 feet, it doesn't count as FAR, and what we want to do is capture that as if it were a floor, so that we're again looking at reducing some of that mass of the structure. That's a brief summary of the applications and what we were trying to do. I think it may be good if the board has questions, I'll try to answer them in any order that you want. I appreciate you letting me run through the presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Lee. Jenny?
I didn't notice this before, but for garages, for the ordinance about garages, is it clear, is the facade, is it clear that that's where the front door is? Because, the example that you showed, if there's a garage, couldn't you just say, oh, the front facade is the garage? Because, do we need to define that?
I don't know if we do. I think the only place where that comes in is if the garage is forward of the house, and then it's a side entry garage, so to speak. You've seen some of those designs.
But what about if, like those, the barn houses, where the whole facade is the garage?
Well, it does have a front door, so it's not...
But so facade is, it's just implied that it has the front door?
Yeah, I had exactly the same question that Jenny raised when I looked at the picture of the 2 snout houses. I apologize for the term. It struck me that the language doesn't necessarily prevent that. What we are hoping to accomplish is to have the front door be either even with or in front of the garage door. So I guess I'm just thinking really of an editorial.
Could we just put
copy editing that would make that more specific?
The facade with the front door?
Yeah, I think if the board wants to recommend to council that there be something like that between now and the council meetings, staff can come up with some language that would address that, whether we define what the front facade is or just use the front door. I'm not certain exactly what, but I think if in our recommendation to council, if that's what you want to do, Derek's agreeing with me, you probably caught a good point.
Julie?
Yeah, I would argue that it's a little more complicated, I think, than just saying if the garage projects further out or not. And I'm thinking about some of the mid-century modern homes in the Deer Path, Clover Lane area, and how these carports are specifically designed on the side, projecting out, and they're perfectly adapted to the design and actually aren't dominant, but they do project out forward. So, I don't know, in some ways I don't think we can simply say a good design is a design where the garage is always flush or back, because as Jenny pointed out, the two houses on Valley Road would not be affected really at all. And I don't know, I mean, I don't see how you could put language in there to stop them from, I mean, so I don't know, to me it seems like a more complicated problem than just a sentence in the...
Well, so the ones that you're talking about is the garage door facing the front also? Or is
No,
it
they're
just the
carports.
Well, in here it says that the garage has to be flush with the front, and the garage is flush with the front in those, so, you know.
I understand a little bit what you're saying, Julie, and especially like in Deer Path and Clover, as some of the garage pictures show. There are homes in town where the garage is a couple feet, forward. This regulation would only apply, though, to new construction. You can repair existing, so it doesn't, it's grandfathered in that, if the wood is rotting and they need to replace it, there's nothing that would prohibit them from doing that. But you are correct that it will be changing going forward what you can and can't do. I think we're going to have to think about the language so that we don't have on Valley Road, the garage, you're right, that makes up the whole facade. So an argument, I think, could be made that says, well, it is flush with the facade. It makes it. We'll work on some language on that, and whether it's, that's why I was leaning more, rather than defining facade, to talk about the front door and tying it to that, because that's really what we heard from people is houses are part of a community, and a community means the houses have a front door. On the examples where the garages were very far forward, it was hard to find the front door, and that's, I think, a large part of it. So I'm not certain the best way to do that, but I think we have a week to figure that out, and we can come up with some language that the board, in their memo to council, gives some guidance. We can explain it on the 19th to council as to the rationale for the change.
I think some other towns have this same ordinance, too. Maybe we could look at those.
I just have two comments about the same issue. One is that there should be some distinction made between a carport and a garage, because that Deer Path, Clover neighborhood, as Julie said, those carports are intrinsic to the design quality of the neighborhood, but they're a lot less objectionable. They're a roof with some posts, or there's some very interesting designs actually for the carports, some that are not original but are still very sympathetic to the design of the original houses. So I think because they're so transparent, it's not really a mass, it's just a plane that's sheltering the cars. I think that this should be clear. The new ordinance should be clear that carports are not governed in the same way as a garage would actually be. And the second comment that I have is that, we as a board, in one of the applications that came here, and there was some concern about dominance of the garage in terms of the overall design of houses that were being proposed. And we actually put a condition on that the width of the garage couldn't be more than a certain percentage of the overall width of the house. And that, if we could work something like that in, would totally prevent something like those Valley Road houses where the whole front, or 85% of the front, is just garage. So I would like to suggest that something like that make its way back, or make its way into the ordinance as well. Some kind of a notion that the garage just can't be an overwhelming percentage of the facade of the building.
I think I need a little guidance from the full board on that one. We initially talked about that, and there was concern that would not be a quick fix, that we didn't have consensus. In the focus groups, we did talk about doing a percentage, and there wasn't a whole lot of support throughout. I agree with you, David. I think something like that would go a long way to addressing the concern if you're saying, you want to reduce the dominance of the garage. But I do have to take the other side, which was at the task force meetings, when we talked about it, there wasn't a lot of consensus to limit the percentage of the facade to the garage or whatever the standard would be.
Right, I think I support that too, David, but I think these were the kind of, the quicker things that we were doing. So I think we'll keep that in mind when the neighborhood task force will keep it in mind, though, because I think I like that idea, and I think a lot of people on the board do.
I just wonder whether there's any way to, bring it to council, hear what the testimony is before council, and if there's not a lot of objection, that could get included. If there is a lot of objection,
I think procedurally, we can't add anything that's considered substantive, because that would require reintroduction, and we can't do that, because this will be our last meeting in 2016. So it would be pushing it off until 2017, or it would be putting it on the list for something to take a look at in 2017 and going ahead with the language that's in there now. I think we can clarify the language. It's not a change, but putting a percentage is more than just clarifying.
I could add, Mayor, I would tend to agree with you, because I'm hoping that I can convince the municipal attorney that adding a definition of facade, or it's clarifying, whereas I think, David, while I agree with you, it's a new standard.
Lee, I had sent you a couple of items this afternoon.
Want me to discuss? I didn't know if you wanted to bring them up, or...
Well, no, this is very minor. I think, I just wanted to know whether they were substantive or not. I think that the porch thing should be clarified to be front porches. I mean, it's implied, but it doesn't say so anywhere. And it should also probably be single-story porches, because there are a number of two-story porches that are not, a floor in between or something that are part of the monumental mansion aspect of new houses, so...
Yeah, what Wanda and I had discussed was that there are some homes that currently have or used to have a two-story porch, and I had put in a standard, if you look in Section 2, 1A, that they wouldn't have a second floor, basically, porch. Again, because concerns, what we were hearing was the mass. Wanda, I didn't know whether that would be true throughout the community or only in a historic district as a way to say that, because I don't have a problem with it when it's appropriate, and something like, historically that there was a porch, but I just didn't know. I'm a little concerned if we remove the language for the second floor, because then we've increased the size. These are no longer just a entry porch, 6 feet wide or whatever. We're allowing an 8 by 25 foot porch, so it's going to run the full length or half the length, depending on the size of the house, of the facade, and to have a large, whether it's a thin railing or it's hard to regulate what happens there.
That I don't understand. What I'm saying is that there are houses that have two-story porches, but there's no floor or anything. There's no entrance from the second floor under these porches. They're simply a monumental porch. And they're often about this dimension at the bottom, too.
Yeah, it's just hard to regulate that when they may not have a door today, but they have a window, and the window becomes a door. But if you want us to, because again, if it's existing, it can remain. Or if you want, we can strike the last sentence, which...
Lee, maybe you I think you might be thinking of something different from what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think you are, too.
It's a porch that goes... The pillars on the porch are twice as high as most porches.
By interpretation, if that's the case, that's still a one-story. It doesn't have a floor. I thought you meant Can we turn the projector on again? There's everybody. The house on the right, something like
No,
that. That's what I thought you meant.
I'm telling you about something that looks like Drumthwacket.
Yeah. That's a porch, that's a one-story porch. If it were
If the
cathedral
roof is-
space with, then we'd be counting it as FAR, but we don't count porches for FAR.
I think it would look weird on a street if all the other porches are one-story porches to put a two-story porch. I think that's what you're worried about, right? Because, I can just imagine it would be one of these newer houses that would have a porch that was much higher than all the other porches.
It's a question, and I don't know whether this is just what I see as a loophole that nobody else does, or whether,
Well, if it's just a matter of being able to have the pillars and the porch be a two-story space, by definition, that's still a one-story space because it doesn't have a floor. I thought you meant having
no, it
roof
just,
and then more up above.
no.
But Derek, you would agree that would be your interpretation?
It's a single porch, not a double porch or...
I'd like to suggest that this actually there could be an interaction between this piece of the ordinance and the FAR piece. Because the FAR calculation is being changed so that a double height space counts twice. So why shouldn't that apply to a porch as well as an
External
inside
space.
cathedral ceiling?
They're exempt at 200.
Exempt currently, and we just changed the ordinance to exempt 200 square feet of porches, so it didn't count as FAR. If it's not enclosed, would it be counted? Because the cathedral space is enclosed, and that's what we were trying to address. As a porch,
Well, I think the
It would take
cathedral
care of-
space adds bulk to the house, maybe 200 square feet if it's 10 by 20, or it adds bulk to the house, which we heard that houses are large and we're looking for ways to limit the size of them. I'm not sure if that, on the right side, if the porch went above that roof, does it add bulk to the house? Is it visually bulky? I mean, that's,
all what I'm talking about.
we could look at it.
I mean...
You don't see a lot of
I'm a
porches
little
like that.
agnostic about how I feel about this, but I'm just saying that there's a way, I see a way to regulate the height of the porches by using this FAR, making this apply to both unenclosed space and enclosed space. I mean, because I think porches are part of the FAR, right? Anything that's roofed is part of the FAR.
Right, you get a 200-foot exclusion for a covered porch, but with at least one open side.
But if it was covered, it was a two-story covered space,
Then it would be...
or more than 12 feet.
would be
If the
counted
roof over the
twice.
porch is more than 12 feet, then it would be covered twice.
right, because the cathedral
It would be counted
space is
twice.
interior space, and if it's totally enclosed, it's interior space. By having the one side open, it's not.
Well, I think some of these things we'll just have to pick up on other ordinance changes later, rather than go on with
Yeah, I would also recommend if people have photographs, I think it would help our conversation because I feel like there's a little bit of a miscommunication, and so just having a visual, even if it's a sketch, maybe David can help with a sketch, it would help to
Yeah.
make sure we're all talking about the same thing.
Anyway, does anybody else have anything?
Well, I was wondering if the problem with the definition is taken care of is our garages, is there a definition of garage somewhere else in the ordinance? Because that would take care, there would be carport and garage.
As an accessory structure, I'm being advised, so I think we'll have to give that some thought, and hopefully we can have some recommendation to council.
So
I don't think I'm going to be able to do it tonight.
Yeah. Then the other thing was what we've had a resident bring this up, and I agreed with it, that I think that we should put somewhere that it's a minimum setback, because when even though that's how the ordinance read before the borough, it always read that way, I don't think it's obvious that it's a minimum setback. It looks like you have to
we've had that ordinance in the borough for 10 years, and it hasn't been an issue.
Nobody
No,
thinks,
I mean, setbacks are boundaries. So that's the way you think of a setback. You have to be within that building envelope. You don't have to necessarily be right on the outer point of the front yard setback or the rear yard setback. So, in most houses, my experience with the zoning board is people want to put the house in line with, especially on the smaller lots, less than a half acre.
right,
It looks like a missing tooth, or conversely, if you look at Library Place, where the uniform setback is 85 feet and the required setback may be 35, it would look out of place with a house at the 35. So, I mean, it would control it in that instance. On Birch Avenue or Lee Avenue, where your average setback is probably 6 feet and the required setback is 25 feet, most people would want to move that house up because the lots are not that deep. And to put your house back, you're using up all your usable rear yard open space. So it hasn't been a big issue in the borough, and that would be the model that I would look at. And the same accord with the 2-foot plus or minus. That's a case where, I had a case today, somebody wanted to add a dormer addition off of the back of the front roof, and that 2-foot made a difference on the prevailing front yard setback on a property on Chestnut, where, again, the required setback's 25 feet, but the front yard prevailing is 6 feet, and, you know, if they're at 5 feet, and you don't have that 2-foot, they need a variance. They need to spend $1,000 to go to the zoning board, and I just think that a little wiggle room there, it's not really
Yeah.
visible when you look at the streetscape as a whole, so.
okay, well, if you've done it for 10 years and it was written like that and no one's ever else had a question, then I will.
Good point, though.
Okay, anything else, anyone? All going to come to the council meeting and support this? Does somebody want to make a recommendation that we find?
Yes,
Well, before
Are
we do
we
that, I know
having
there's
public-
people who would like to...
people in the public wants to
Are we
speak.
having a public portion of this? Okay. Let me open it to the public then. Anybody want to speak to it?
So, I'm Charles Carney, Prospect Avenue, Princeton. So, I have to say that the presentation that Mr. Solov gave made it sound like the prevailing setback was the build 2 line plus or minus 2 feet. And if it's minus 2 feet plus infinity, it should say that.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you get a little closer to the microphone and put it down or something?
So, the issue is, when I first read this, and at the last council meeting, I understood the rule to be that this was a build 2 line plus or minus 2 feet. If it's not that, it shouldn't say it. I don't think it's a good idea to have staff interpret things one way when everyone reads the ordinance and interprets it another way. If it's really minus 2 feet plus infinity feet, it should say that. And I would also say this thing, even when Mr. Solov was describing that when there's 3 houses on a lot, you can have the setback at either one. Well, that makes it sound like it has to be A or B. But it's actually the smaller one as much and minus it as much as you want. Is it not? Well,
That's the universally understood line of a setback.
Unless it's been, the property owner shall have the option to match either front yard setback. So what does that mean if there's 2 buildings?
Well, we thought that on 3 houses, there's not a real uniform setback unless they're in one line. For example, if one is up here, and one is set back 20 feet, the other's 80 feet, if you use the regular ordinance, which the criticism from the former borough, which has had it for 10 years, was you should throw out the high and low out of the range of your average. So if they're all 20 feet and one's 80 and one's 0 or 10, it skews the average. So if you only have 3, you can't do that. So, and usually on three houses, there's not many blocks in town that only have 3 houses. So we thought of this as an anomaly. That wasn't going to be a big issue.
But if it's a minimum setback, you would just say the minimum. You have to comply with the minimum setback, the smaller of the 2 setbacks. I just don't understand why the language has to be so confusing to someone who's a native English speaker who's technically adept like I am. And I think it's just a big mistake introducing ordinances like this, because you'll get tripped up in council, you get tripped up in the final thing, and it won't pass.
I mean, if we could add minimum, I think it's understood by most
Well,
sign
not, I
professionals.
mean, Jenny had the same confusion too. So, and when you say plus or minus 2 feet, it sounds like it has to be within plus or minus 2 feet. And you're saying it doesn't mean that. You're saying it's minus 2 feet.
There's a minimum setback, if you want to call it a minimum setback, and there's a plus or minus 2 feet because the intent was, why do you need a variance for 1 foot on a front setback when
You only need
the
the
whole
variance in one
average...
direction.
But that's
You only
typical.
need the variance in one direction, so the plus or minus makes it confusing. Say minus 2 feet.
No, you need it either way. If you're at 6 feet is the average setback, and the person is at 5 feet is their setback
No,
currently.
let's do it the other way. Supposing the mean prevailing setback is 6, and you want to build it at 9, do you need a variance or not?
No.
Okay. It's not clear from the text.
I mean, it's...
Okay, I've made my point. That's number one. Number two, I just am totally confused with the way you do the A and B clauses. So there's a thing saying if the mean front setback, the mean prevailing front setback is more than 5 feet or less than 6 feet of the required minimum setback. So that means it's exactly 5 feet of the required setback, if I'm trying to interpret it literally. I think what you mean is not within. So why didn't you say it?
Again, it was in the borough for 10 years. We never had an issue with it. It's designed, if the required setback is 25 feet, if the average prevailing is 19, you would need to go to that 19. Conversely, if it was 31, you'd need to go to the 31. The intent was not to reinvent.
A normal English speaker can't understand B and C conditions.
I'll take your point, but that's the first time in 10 years I've heard that comment with the ordinance, but...
This is a chance to get it right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Currently on next.
Hi, I'm Marina Rabina, local resident and an architect. And one of the projects that were shown today, the project under construction, was the project that I'm the architect for. And we did, as Lee described, ask for a variance to be in line with other houses on Lee Avenue. And we're really grateful that that variance was granted and we eliminated that missing tooth issue. But I think clients would very much benefit from trying to fit in the neighborhood and not having to go to the zoning board to allow them to do what the right thing is to fit in the neighborhood. So thank you, hopefully, for looking into that one and correcting that issue. What I was hoping to talk to you about is the two-story space or the cathedral ceiling. And I understand the intent is to limit the bulk of houses that are being built. I'm very hesitant. Didn't see any examples, and I don't see that this being such a huge problem. I don't think any of these developer projects that are being built having a lot of these two-story spaces that are over 12 feet. I don't think developers want to put money into building open space because that's just more expensive for them and not going to get anything out of it. What happens is people who are building smaller houses, for example, that house on Lee Avenue that I'm working on, that house is 1,900 square feet. So these people are going to be having a very small house, and in order for them to feel a little bit of spaciousness, to have some place of relief, some place where it's two-story high, so you can't get a lot of expense this way, but at least you get some sense of larger space in your house, and it's fun to have spaces like that. I don't know if anybody of you experienced it, so I'm showing pictures. And this regulation disproportionately affects people with smaller houses because if you have to count that double-story space 2 times, then of course nobody's going to do it on a small house. You know, if I have 1,900 square feet, I'm not going to give it away to a whole, right? So what I'm trying to suggest that these two-story spaces on smaller houses really help out. For example, if you look on the second page, this is my house. The next one, my house with my children. This is my playroom at my house. Yes, it's a lot busier today than it looks in this picture, but that loft space is about, 6 feet wide. Would I make a playroom 6 feet wide? No, but when it feels like it's part of the larger space, it makes a lot of sense, right? And then we're downstairs with friends on the couch, and the kids are upstairs building Legos, and you get that sense of connection in the sense that you get a sense of usable space. Or, for example, the next picture of the living room with the library space, right? Not my project, found that. But it creates these very interesting creative spaces that effectively, once you pass this regulation, only the people with 6,000 square foot houses could afford, right? Us with 2,000 square foot houses, we really can't be having this anymore. So, and then this is the project, my project on Lee, the one that was shown today. So these guys, instead of having a corridor connecting a bedroom in the front and a bedroom in the back, they're having a slightly wider corridor with an open space. This is not a huge, ginormous thing that's making this house a lot bigger. But it allows them to have this floor area on the second floor where they could have a desk and feel like they're part of something, and the 6 foot wide corridor is effectively a pleasant, usable space. So what I'm wondering if there's a way to think about this, and similar to, for example, we don't count porches under 200 square feet. What if we had a similar allowance, say 200 square feet, or I don't know what you think is appropriate. 200 sounds, it's a parking space. My living room is 14 by 14, right? That's about the 200 square foot. And that allows you to have that people with, don't count the first 200 square foot. After that, when people are having, I don't know, thousands and thousands of square feet, I could see that being a problem. But that allows you to have that relief in a small house. So alternatively, if you look on the first page, right, this is if we just literally take the letter of the law as proposed, right? So not allowed 12 feet and over, you're supposed to count it, right? But if I were to put a floor in there, right, and make it an attic, all of a sudden, boom, I don't have to count it anymore, right? So the bulk of the house doesn't change, but what changed is my ability to interact with the person on the second floor and, throw paper airplanes at each other. So I'm just thinking that a lot of creativity, and this is affecting smaller, more interesting houses designed by architects rather than the developer McMansions that we're talking about. So I understand the desire to do something quickly, but can we also be really cognizant of the sort of unintended consequences of, whoops, last year we almost killed porches. Now we're going to kill the lofts? Yes.
Well, so on the front page,
yes.
I mean, it does look to me like that's a bigger house than it would be if you did, because the ceiling is higher, so you could make, I'm not, it seems to me like this is an example of how you made the house more bulky. It's exactly, to me, it's an illustration of what we...
Right, but once the regulation passed, right, I'm perfectly allowed to do the one on the right-hand side, right? And I don't have to count it twice.
But there wouldn't be any reason to do it.
Well, why not? It makes a much easier roof slope. I don't know.
But the ceiling is much higher in that area.
So, what I'm trying to understand is if I could, what you're trying to suggest, like once you say, okay, Marina, you have to have 12 feet, otherwise we're going to count it. What that means, I'm going to have to put a flat roof on that, right? If somebody wants to have a 12-foot living room, then you're going to say, okay, cut it off at 12 feet. All my clients are going to say, no, thank you, I don't want a flat roof, I want a sloping roof. So because of snow and other issues, people are afraid of flat roofs. So then I'm going to go back and say, okay, I got to have myself a sloping roof, so I'm going to do it. So the bulk of the house didn't change from the outside one little bit, right? What changed is that we eliminated the interior connection.
But
Right.
you would have, I mean, if you put a roof the same as the other room, right?
Right.
You would have a big space up there to, I mean, the upper floor would be more usable,
Well,
farther over into the other space.
you mean if I were to use that as an attic?
Well, if you used the same roof line as the other room.
Yeah, I
They
think,
are the same roof line.
right. Maureen, I think at this point, we're sort of redesigning, and...
Yeah, we're getting into the
I think
weeds.
there are other people waiting to
So-
talk, too.
I'm perfectly happy to pass it on. What I'm just trying to reiterate here is let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Thank you.
I'd like
Okay.
to add to that. We've been living at 16 Kimberly
Can you
Court.
speak in the microphone so we can hear you?
Hear this gentleman.
We've been living at 16 Kimberly Court in the Glen for the last 25 years. My wife and I decided to move to a much smaller place. We decided to scale down. So we purchased a lot behind the Beatty house. Beatty house is 35 feet tall. The next one behind us is also 35 feet tall. We are allowed to go up to 35. We don't want to. But we don't want to build a midget. That will violate everything I have just heard. You will see a midget house between two 35-footers. So we would like to have a cathedral ceiling and still have a reasonable height. Bulk will not change. So I see everything in this proposal illogical to our thinking.
Okay, thank you.
Your name again, please? Sir? Last name is Aksay, A-K-S-A-Y.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Louisa Clayton. I'm a resident architect, and I'm also on the zoning board, and have been for a few years. I want to reiterate what Marina's just said about some of these ordinances really penalizing the smaller houses on the smaller lots. I agree with her about the cathedral ceilings. I also want to say about the garage situation, one of the major things we see at the zoning board is all about parking. And so I understand people's concern about the garages being in front of the house entrance and really taking over the streetscape. But by the same token, everybody's required to have 2 parking places on their lots. And if you can't park in the front yard, you have to park in your garage, or you have to set your house back farther, or you have to have a driveway that can take you back to behind your house, where you can then have parking behind your house in your backyard. So I don't think that this garage issue can be taken up without really truly considering parking and how people are parking. Because on narrow lots, you don't have space for a driveway to get back, or you don't have space to park next to your house beyond your front yard setback. You have to park, in your front yard or in front of your house or something, and I think that also has to do with the front yard, the prevailing front yard setback as well. I think I'm up to date on it, and I think that it's talking about, holding the line of where, for the prevailing front yard, holding the line of where the houses are, which I think is great, because we had the Birch House on the one in from the corner come before us for zoning, and they asked for all sorts of things for zoning variances. The one thing they did not ask for was to come up and meet the rest of the street. And I said to them that night, are you sure you don't want to ask to come up and add that on as a variance? And they said, we can't afford the time. We can't afford the money to come back a second time. We really need to get the approvals, if we can, tonight so we can move forward. And that's a huge shame, and that is a missing tooth on that block, because they were trying to do as much, conform with as much as they possibly could, knowing that they were asking for other variances. So I think that's an important thing to think about. So thank you so much.
So you're
I also don't think these things should really be rushed into. I know you really want to show the general public that you're doing something and you're acting to their concerns. But
I do think that there are lots of things to consider with this, and they will make a big difference. So,
I just want to clarify, so you are in favor of the prevailing setback piece of this ordinance? Is that, did I hear you right? Yeah, okay.
Chris Tarr, 93 Overbrook. I want to support Ms. Crumiller's suggestion that the language of the prevailing setback be clarified with the utmost of respect for my friend Mr. Bridger. It is unclear. The discussion we just had makes it unclear. I mean, you should be, as a minimum, if you just put the word minimum in, it's not a substantive change. It's unclear. I know it to be unclear from talking to people. It's complicated and unclear. On cathedral ceilings, it's just tasteless what you're doing. I mean, it just takes away the creativity of all our area professionals and homeowners. I have 12-foot ceilings in my home. I don't think they're offending anybody. I don't think they should add to the FAR. It's just foolish. And I second the comments which I think Mr. Cohen was trying to make and which has been made as well. This is the second year in a row where you have decided the day after Election Day to put 5 zoning changes in place so as to have them take effect at the last meeting in December with no ability for this board or anybody else to make changes to them. And it's wrong. It's not the right way to go about zoning. So there are 2 of you and 3 now who have the opportunity next year to do it differently. You say you let people participate, you invite people in, you ask for their comments, and then you just do it all on your own. It's not right.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to?
I just want to address one thing that Mr. Bridger said. So he said that the conditions for the plus or minus 5 feet
Yeah, you have to speak.
were understood before in the borough. And
Right, but you have to
the
speak
language
right
is
into the
clearer
microphone.
in the stuff that's crossed out. Please use the language that's been crossed out and not the confusing language that's been added.
I agree. When it first came out, it was confusing, the plus or minus.
Anyone else? All right, let me close the public portion and David?
I just want to make a comment about the FAR aspect, because I do really sympathize with Marina and Chris. I think that double height space, especially if you've got a mezzanine, can be a real design feature. But I think we have to keep in mind that there's a trade-off as well, because these older homes in these same neighborhoods were not built with double height spaces. It's not a typical feature. And so, by definition, and by the way, the older houses often don't max out the FAR on the lot. So if we allow these double height spaces, while it's a benefit in terms of creative design, it's going to create structures that are out of keeping with the other structures in the neighborhood. And that's what this ordinance change is trying to accomplish. So we have to sort of weigh those pros and cons. There's no way you can have both, where you can have these double height spaces and have the new construction fit in massing-wise in these neighborhoods.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, please.
This is just one thought. I'm sure this is a substantive change, but maybe to address part of this is that if the house is a small house in total, and I don't know what the right size is, if it's under, say, 2,000 square feet, then maybe it's exempt from this. I'm not sure what impact that would have, but if it's, I think part of what this is trying to address is, like, I understand the creativity that's needed inside, especially in a small house, but I agree with David that it has an impact on the street as well. And if the main issue is dealing with a small house when the space is tight, maybe there's a way to do both, where, I don't know, that was just my thought in trying to hear everything. Yeah, Julie?
I really like that idea, because I do see smaller homes being penalized in ways that, just make it harder. And I do think these are really targeted at those, 5,000 square foot plus houses. And David's right. I mean, you can't have everything, but maybe by exempting a smaller house, we can kind of target it to the areas we want to go to, rather than penalizing somebody really stuck on a small lot trying to be creative.
I would just, it seems like a change, so it doesn't seem like something you can do this month.
Ms. Ullman?
I guess I am troubled by the cathedral ceiling one. And it's, I think the idea in the beginning was to find a way to discourage houses that are too large. It's actually useful for us to have an architect give us intuitive or counter examples, because we're looking at a bulk, a street, a neighborhood, and trying to find ways of moderating what residents and we sometimes see as excessive building, and we don't always think about the other consequences. So I thought your points were well made. I am uncomfortable, I will say, with where we are on that particular change. The other three I don't have any problem with. I'm not terribly concerned about the parking. I think the garage, the way we have stated the changes regarding the garage makes sense both for the public and for me. I think the prevailing setback makes sense as long as the wording is clear enough for everybody to understand it. And I think the front porch one works. The only one I feel personally ambivalent about, because I think I don't understand all the implications of it, is the FAR for the cathedral ceilings, and I just put that out there.
Right. Can I ask Mr. Bridger a question that came up in the council meeting when this was first brought up? How did we end up on stairways which have loft space above them, or the space for a stairway? I think that is counted at each floor as
the stairway twice. I mean, it becomes like a geometry question with every house, and the model is like water, anytime there's any area to increase FAR, they do it. So we, as a matter of interpretation of policy, we count stairways twice.
Okay. I think that was one of the things someone asked before. Yes, Tim?
I would certainly support Liz's idea of exempting smaller houses from the cathedral ceiling regulation, and as such we might want to just pull that from what we send back to council, recommend that the other pieces go through. And I wanted to address the notion that this is sort of being rushed through at the end of the year. This has been a pretty long and deliberate process from my perspective. Nothing moves quickly in Princeton, and this was no exception. I mean, this process began in the spring, I believe, in March or so. It was definitely...
I think it was even earlier than that, because some of the slides have 2014 on them.
Yeah, where the first discussions were had, and I think that, all due respect to the builders and architects in the room, that there are many people in town who are welcoming these changes and are asking for them. Certainly, we need to have well-thought-out proposals put before council, but I disagree with the notion that this is sort of a post-election day rush to get something through. So if we took the three that I think they're consensus on the board and more or less in the room and recommended those to council and then sent back the cathedral ceiling piece for further study, I think that we would have a nice compromise there.
I would just, I agree with what Mr. Quinn said. I would just add two clarifications to that. So one is, I think already staff took down the note of cleaning up the language for the prevailing setback, and then the other was clarifying the definition of a garage. And I'd want those both to go in our note back to council.
Garage versus carport. And is it in the code anywhere where a garage is defined?
There's a definition of garage in both codes, but it speaks about a garage is an accessory structure, so it needs to be tweaked, and it has to have some relation, I guess, to the front door.
Okay.
Or the width.
Thanks.
And you're all agreed that our recommendation would be to hold back on the cathedral ceiling? I just want to remind you that this went through discussion last year in December. The cathedral ceiling did, so this is at least the second time around for it in my recollection.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with not making a recommendation on the cathedral ceilings, but I do want to just emphasize to the members of the board that this ordinance in no way forbids cathedral ceilings. It's just saying how large of a house that you can have on a lot of a given size. But, you know, if you're willing to give up floor area, you can have your cathedral ceiling, and you can have all the architectural creativity you want. So we're not really talking about forbidding architectural creativity. We're just limiting sizes of structures.
All right, so I gather the recommendation is as expressed, that it's the first three with the language changes. Mr. Sullivan has written down.
I think we have pretty clear notes. I do want to caution you, I'm a little worried about how we're going to define garages, because as pointed out tonight, on the really small lots where the facade is mostly garage, that's going to be a problem in terms of how we define it. I can see, that's why I said tonight we're not going to solve it, but as you think about it, if you have a 30 or 40 foot wide lot, the John Witherspoon neighborhood, and they want to have a garage, or they want to have the parking, the entire facade is a garage. And so we're going to have to be careful as to how we word it, so I don't think we want to prohibit that. So I'll start giving it some thought. What I'm doing, I guess, is inviting all of you to give it a little bit of thought as well. And if you have some ideas, let me know, because it's not going to be an easy solution when we start modifying it.
My only suggestion would be to ask Mark Keener if they can point to other code, because it seems like we're not the first ones that have had this idea.
All right, do we need a motion on this, since it's going? Tim made a motion, right?
Yes.
And there was a second?
Consider it moved.
Okay, and there was a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, and seconded by Ms. Ullman. All those in favor of recommending the first three items with the changes to council and asking them to hold the cathedral ceiling section for future study?
Can I make, I'm sorry, but can I make an amendment, which is partly in response to what Lee is saying, so that I think that I'd like to recommend that in the event that it becomes difficult to define garages in such a way that we can accomplish what we're trying to do, that council consider postponing the garage item as well to investigate the potential of regulating the width of the garage relative to the overall width of the building as a possible solution to that. So, I know, if Alan were here, he would word that for me, but...
But wait, I thought, aren't we going to say something like the front door has to be, that it's in relation to the front door?
I don't know if we will be able to, because that's the problem on a smaller lot. If you're saying we don't want garages on the smaller lot, then it's not a problem. But I worry where you have a 40-foot wide lot, okay, and you need 8 and 20, you need 8-foot minimum side yard setback, total of 20. The house is getting very narrow, and if you look, what happens on these smaller lots is everybody wants a garage, so they get a one-car garage, and that's the facade. If we limit the percentage of the garage to the facade of the building, you may be saying to people on narrow lots that they're not going to have a garage. And that's not what we can discuss that, and we've had some, but that was not where we were going with this amendment.
And I want to explain a little bit more about that, because, Jenny, if you push the front door up to the front of the garage on a narrow lot, you're going to have this long hallway from the front door to where you actually get to the living space, which would be behind the garage. If the lot's too narrow to put living space next to the garage, then requiring the front door to be in the same plane as the garage door is going to lead to this bizarre long entry hallway from the front door to the actual living space. So that's the reason why you end up with a setback front door and on a narrow lot, and some of the complication that Lee is talking about. So I do think that, I guess the bottom line is, I'm saying I think that the garage piece of the ordinance also may require further study, just like the FAR piece may require further study.
But I feel like we're not really, then we're just going to end up with garages right on the, that we don't want that way. I mean,
Well, again, it's a question of lot size and actually the size of the house. I mean, this works for certain size lots and larger lots, but it's not going to work for the smallest ones. So, what do you want to do? We have a motion and a second. Do you want to recommend further study for that, or do you want to? Because this is going to be a lot of wordsmithing in 1 week for staff.
Well, I would recommend on the wordsmithing piece that we go back to Mark Keener and the consultants.
Okay.
Because we're not we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel here. And we keep reading about all these other communities, and this is one of the first ordinances they pass. And it's not like Princeton has smaller lots than a lot of the other towns that are also dealing with this. So I like how David put it, where if we have trouble getting language before it goes back to council, then we caution council that they may want to take another look. But I don't know if we want to preemptively say hold, because there might be a solution that's out there that will...
I think we all found a certain amount of virtue in this, and I think that probably with the right wording and we're looking at it the right way, we could. I will say, David, that in looking at ordinances from other places and the problems people have had with them, I asked Lee about this one this afternoon. A lot of places found that people were solving, as the anti-snout house ordinances came in, people were solving this problem by making the forward garage and then bringing a porch out so that it was an even facade from the garage door across the porch, and it got rid of that long hallway along the garage and put people right into the living space from the porch. And there seemed to be quite a number of developments in, say, Ohio and Indiana, where this was the solution to anti-snout ordinances.
So as Liz was saying, that may be the solution that can be put in place before the council meeting. So we don't have to recommend against the garage piece of the ordinance. We just have to express, because we're just making a recommendation. We're not passing anything here.
That's right.
So I think what we want to recommend to the council is that we have some reservations about the wording the way it is now. And, the record shows exactly what our reservations are. But if those reservations can be resolved with some minor tweaking of the language between now and the council meeting, we'd support it.
Okay.
Proceed with caution.
Right. So maybe you should just call the roll on this recommendation, and we'll, because we do have.
Just a moment. Is the maker of the motion going to add that? And then is the seconder also going to add that?
So I would add language that we're recommending the garage with anticipating additional language that clarifies what David was trying to say.
Right. You understand.
And you were the seconder, right?
Sure.
I don't know if I'm as good as Alan in summarizing. I think there were a couple of comments that there seemed to be consensus on. So it's section 2, dealing with porches. I think we were going to call it front porches as opposed to porches. And then 2, dealing with garage. The board felt the need to either define the front facade or have language regarding the front door. I'm not quite certain how we're going to say it, but that there is concern with how this regulation will be put in effect, in particular with narrower lots, where the garage becomes the front facade. Is that, what I thought the board's concern was that, as shown on some of the slides, the garage, the front facade can be the garage, and to a certain extent, I think you want to avoid that, but it becomes problematic as you look at narrower lots where maybe they don't have an option. So the language needs to be adjusted, and we'll talk with Mark Keener from RBA to see if we can come up with that. But just to share with council, I think your concern on the regulation for garages was primarily twofold, in that how it would affect narrower lots, and 2, on larger ones, to ensure that the front facade not be just those garage doors, which is what we saw. Then in section 4, for mean prevailing front setback, we would add mean prevailing minimum front setback. Was there a consensus to do that as well?
And that was the borough language, was it?
Yeah, we would do that. No, actually, that minimum was never in either one. Was it in? No, it was not in the former borough either. I mean, that's what Derek was saying. For the last 10 years, we haven't had it. But if it clarifies it, that's fine. I don't know whether you wanted to recommend or suggest that, whether they do it in this ordinance or consider it for a future amendment, that the cathedral space being counted twice would only be would not include houses under 2,000 square feet. I think that's a better solution than if you were to say not the first 200 square feet, because that isn't going to do what we want. But if the concern is smaller, I thought Marina's exhibits are good. Maybe if we had the actual square footage so that you could graphically see it. But I don't know if there was consensus for that, if it's not a substantive change, and that you can word it so that consideration should be given to amending it in the future for the 2,000 square feet. And in the interim, I can talk to the municipal attorney to give her a heads up and get her thinking as to whether or not that's substantive or clarifying.
Well, how did you choose? I don't know. Oh, sorry.
I didn't make that comment to generate another conversation. I just wanted to make sure that the maker of the motion and the seconder would be on record as having that as a concern from this body, not to have another discussion, because obviously we can't do that, we can't clarify tonight. That's the only reason I made that. So if we could just move on, he will pass those concerns on to council, who will make the final decision. And all of that, some of that may be cleared up in the interim.
Well, I just want to, I don't know how big a 2,000 square foot house is, if that's really small. I don't know. I don't know how, I'm really bad with not knowing. I don't know what my house
The
is.
first slide Lee showed us said that the average house in 73 was 1,660 square feet. So 2,000 is not a small house by
Bigger than
Princeton's.
average. So shouldn't it
It's
be
bigger than the
smaller?
average from back then.
Shouldn't our number be smaller than 2,000?
No, I think probably a small house now is about 19.
This is why it is a substantive change, and it really,
Yeah,
I don't
so-
see how it can be done in December.
Yeah, it's been pulled
Okay.
from the motion. that's
Oh,
on the
right,
floor.
right. It's pulled anyway. Okay.
Okay.
But
Tim,
point's well
didn't your motion, however, exclude the
Yes.
recommendation?
Yeah, that's right. So forget it.
And so,
But your point's well taken, Jenny, about what, I mean, we're going to have to define what a small house is eventually, and greater minds than mine will offer us a lot of input into that, but it's not part of the current motion.
okay, I just want, if I'm going to revise or change my second, I want to be sure we're still
second?
on track.
Okay.
A
So
little difficult, but I think I am, and
are we all agreed on this? Now, would you just run down the roll, please?
Ms. Capizoli?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Crummiller?
Yes.
Mayor Lempert? Yes. Mrs. Trotman?
Yes.
Mrs. Ullman?
yes.
Mrs. Gunning?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Mr. Williamson?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for coming and helping us with our discussion. And I think now we should move on to the application for tonight.
You thought we were going to have a short meeting. You were sorely delusional.
Okay, well, everybody is sort of settling in. The hearing for this evening is Princeton Day School. This is preliminary and final major site plan with variances and extended protection. This is 650 Great Road, Block 3501, lots 11, 12, 101, and 201. And I think we'll hear from Mr. Solo first on this, if we may.
Mr. Solo, you swear affirm your testimony this evening will be truthful.
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you and good evening. As the chair indicated, this is a preliminary and final site plan application. I'm going to be using a series of boards or sheets from the application packet that you have. I'll mark each one as I go through them, but you all have these. I'm going to start with sheet CE1, which I'll label as PB1. As many of you know, PDS is located on the west side of Great Road between Stort Road and Pretty Brook. So let me orient you. Great Road is running here diagonally through the middle of the site, up and down. Old Great Road West, runs along here. At the bottom of the map, Pretty Brook Road. Up the top here is Stort Road. outlined in black is the PDS campus, which has a little bit over 100 acres in size. PDS itself serves approximately 939 students. They have over 200 full-time employees, and they've reported that approximately 15% of their student population arrive by bus. Tonight, we're going to be talking about 4 distinct projects that PDS is proposing to construct over a 10-year time period. In the application materials, they consider this sort of a master plan for them, and the projects will proceed as funding becomes available. The projects include a parking and circulation improvement for the lower school, and that's this, I've highlighted in sort of pink, this box here coming off of the Great Road. The second project is providing additional tennis courts and parking located towards the back of the campus, again outlining it here. The third major project is the construction of a field house and redesigning the parking area here. This is also the location of where the ice rink is, if you're familiar with the PDS campus. And then the fourth project is improvements to pedestrian and vehicle connections between the field house and the academic portion of the school. And I'll go through each of those improvements in a little bit more detail now. The next sheet is sheet CE8 in your packet. I will label it also as a Planning Board Exhibit Number 2. This shows that first box that I had outlined, the lower school improvements and parking improvements, and let me just briefly, again, orient you. Great Road to the right, located here to the east of the property, not shown, but way down here would be Pretty Brook Road. The lower school is located here on the left side of the map. The main entrance at the light is located right here, which is the main entrance into the PDS campus. And what they're proposing to do is to construct a new loop road to improve drop-off and pickup. So once you come in, you'll make a right, and you can loop around here. And primarily, this is for, as you've seen in the material, to allow for additional stacking so that the traffic that queues along the main drive and sometimes out to the Great Road can now all queue within the campus itself. Also, as part of this, they will construct 41 parking spaces. 20 of them are on the loop as parallel parking spaces, and the remainder are in the proposed parking lot shown in this general location as well. Then there are some sidewalk and improvements being made to the amphitheater as well, and then the typical landscaping that we would expect along with some of this type of construction. Additional sidewalks and lighting are also shown on the detail sheet. Let me pause for a minute. Are there questions on this part? And then I'll go to the second phase. This is sheet CE14 in your packet, and I think we're at PB3. This is what was called or highlighted as the tennis court and parking improvements. Same orientation, you can't see it, but Great Road is out here. There's a secondary entrance called Campus Road running along the top that goes out to the Great Road. The existing ice rink would be just off of the map up here. The academic campus down at the bottom off to the right. What's shown, outlined briefly, is some existing tennis courts. And as part of this improvement, they will add 2 new tennis courts located here to the right, this rectangle. And then a much larger parking area, 79 new porous pavement parking spaces. The site will also have underground stormwater management and a series of new walkways getting from the new field house and to the tennis courts. Any questions on the tennis court? The third major one is the field house and parking plan, same orientation. You can see this is Great Road West, so Great Road would be off the map, the academic campus down below. At the bottom of this map, this is Campus Road. So the tennis courts, you can see a little bit of the tennis court and the parking area are located here at the bottom left of the site. Existing labels the ice rink. And in this case,
that's PB4?
oh, I'm sorry.
And what
yes.
sheet is that?
This is sheet CE20 and should be PB4. Thank you, Karen. They are proposing to construct a 44,645 square foot addition to the ice rink, which will house 6 squash courts, 3 basketball courts, locker rooms, and coach's office. Then they're going to reconfigure the existing parking lot, which will then be 81 spaces. It will net 6 additional spaces from what was currently there. The existing parking is dashed in. You can see it runs roughly along in here as well. In addition to the major improvements for the building and the parking, they will provide underground stormwater management for this area. They will construct a new service drive to the rink, which there are some comments about and we'll talk about. This is Great Road West. Currently, there's a little bit of a gravel path to the rear end of the ice rink, and they are looking to improve that a little bit and serve the ice rink. And then there will be additional landscaping and lighting for this. Any questions on the field house? And I realize I'm running through these fairly quickly. The applicant will go through all of these in much more detail. I just want to give you an overview of the improvements because there are a number of them. This shows on both the left and the right is the lighting. The left, I'm going to use the proposed connector. So the ice rink, new field house is just off of the map here, and the academic campus is at the bottom of the map. Running along the top of the map is Campus Road, and this is sheet CE25 and will be Planning Board 5. There's currently an existing road that runs between the ice rink and the proposed field house to the academic campus. It does have a walkway. It's part of the road. It's separated from the road by concrete bumper blocks. And what they're looking to do is normalize that a little bit more, provide a little bit more space so that it's safer to use by all concerned. And it will connect the new field house, the existing ice rink, to the academic campus. So that's a summary of the individual changes. What I'd like to do is share with you some of the staff comments and concerns as well. And I'm going to use one more sheet. And I apologize, the scale, this may be a little bit hard to see. This is sheet CE6 in your packets, PB6. This shows in dashed lines the 4 area of improvements. And there's a red line that I've drawn, hopefully you can all see that runs through. And the property on this side primarily is located in the C1 zone or riparian zone. And that's been one of the comments from our Environmental Commission as well, is that portions of the PDS campus are constrained by a 300-foot wide riparian zone adjacent to on-site tributaries to the Stony Brook. And the way the regulations work, as I understand them, is the Stony Brook has been designated by the state as what's called a C1 stream, and it is entitled to additional protections, that 300-foot buffer. In addition to the Stony Brook, all the tributaries to that also have that 300-foot. There are tributaries running through the campus that go down to the Stony Brook. In the case of this site, and I'm sure as the applicant will explain, they're not really streams. They're intermittent. I was out there today after all the rain. They're wet, but there's no running water. But they are entitled to that 300-foot riparian zone protection. As you can see from the map, the lower school parking lot loop, portions of it, and most of it, lie within that 300-foot buffer. A portion of the tennis court, just this little corner, lie within that 300-foot buffer, as well as portions of the loop road and the detention outfall. You can also see part of the field house and the existing ice rink are also, and additional parking that already exists are within it. So it's a disturbed area to some extent. Some of the areas of disturbance are wooded, some of them are open. There are a number of trees that will be coming down as well. We've asked the applicant during their presentations to provide you with a little bit clearer map than I'm able to produce with the materials that we have available. By way of zoning, this is in the E4 zone. The use is permitted. The zoning officer has identified some variances. They are from 10B 246, where a 75-foot setback is required for a loading area, and the ice rink loading area, which is in here, is encroaching on that. I think I understand that they will be relocating that, but we'll let the applicant address that. Then there's a variance for parking stall dimension, 10B 284. The ordinance requires a 9 by 19 required space. 9 by 18 is proposed. That's a variance that in the past the board has granted to PDS and many other applicants as well. Staff comment in terms of the loading area and the variance, we have asked that the applicant consider relocating that to the interior road, probably this campus road, and access the rink some other way so that it's not within the front setback or visible then by the neighbors. In your packet information, a traffic report has been submitted with this application. It indicates that the lower school parking and loop road should improve the existing conditions where vehicles queue all the way back to the Great Road during drop-off and pickup. Our traffic consultant, the board's traffic consultant, is here. Brian can answer some of your questions if you have. By way of the site, a total of 562 parking spaces are being provided. That exceeds the minimum required by the ordinance, which is 432. We've asked the applicant to explain the need for the additional parking. Brian, our traffic consultant, has raised some questions regarding queuing and sidewalk improvements, which should be addressed by the applicant during their presentation. As I mentioned, a number of trees will be removed. There are 331 trees between 3 inches and 36 inches, which will be removed as part of construction. A tree analysis has been done by PDS, and it's been submitted and reviewed by staff. Approximately 107 of these trees, of the 331, are dead or in poor condition. A large number of those trees are ash trees. We are concerned that as the emerald ash borer will result in the demise of some of these others. And you'll see in our landscape consultant and the staff reports, we've asked PDS to consider some sort of replanting plan for the inevitable when these trees become diseased and die. The site will add approximately 3 acres of new paved surface. All of that will be controlled by a stormwater plan that's been reviewed by Mr. West and Mr. Scupian. They do have some requests for some technical modifications, but in general they found that the stormwater management plan complies with the municipal ordinance. Should point out that PDS is proposing to utilize porous pavement with underground detention and rain gardens, as well as biodetention basins. There will also be manufactured treatment devices, all to mitigate stormwater impacts. I'd like to spend a little bit of time just highlighting the SPRAD comments and the PEC comments for you as well. SPRAD grouped their comments in terms of the improvements being made. For the lower school, they had two comments. One, they asked the applicant to reconsider the demolition of the existing ramp for the amphitheater, and they asked him to reconsider the location of the crosswalks at the driveways. Let me go back to those plans. So we're back on sheet CE8, which is PB2. This is the loop road. The amphitheater is located here next to the lower school, and the ramps they're talking about are here, and the applicant will discuss that with you in terms of the SPRAD comments. The crosswalk that they're talking about is located here, and I think they're asking for it to be moved back. Staff has a concern, and Mr. West can amplify it, or Brian Stankus, our traffic engineer. The stop line is here, and the crosswalk is where it belongs, on the other side of the stop walk. So we do have a concern if with SPRAD's comments, if the board were to impose it. The next comments deal with the tennis court improvements. And SPRAD has requested that the applicant reconsider the walk configuration between the parking area and the individual tennis courts. And I think what they were looking for is there is a walkway here through the parking lot, sidewalk here that sort of runs in a V shape, and they were hoping to have something, this is somewhat of a detention basin, but have something connect more directly to the tennis courts. And with that, they've asked that the applicant reshape the detention basin to connect a ramp to the center walkway, which is also what I was showing, and that they provide a pedestrian link along Campus Road between the field house and tennis court. So what they're looking for is there is a sidewalk that runs along here and goes up to the field house. They were asking the applicant to come up with a slightly different version of that. Next is on the field house. And here, SPRAD has asked that the applicant provide a mulch path connecting the west entry sidewalk to the south entry. So they're looking for some sort of mulch path, I think, in this area, from the proposed new entrance to an existing site entrance on the south. That they consider modifying the pedestrian path that connects the west side of the parking lot to the tennis courts. A curved design would be more desirable. What is shown is sort of a right angle, and I think they're looking to have something curved through there, more in the direction of what students are most likely to be walking in instead of in straight lines. They suggest that the ice rink loading area should be moved to the campus road, that the applicant consider solar panels on south-facing roofs, that they consider green roofs on areas of flat roofs. They coordinate the bike and pedestrian connections to our master plan, and they support the use of concrete curbing instead of Belgian block curbings in areas that are less visible. And they've asked the applicant to provide proof that they've received all the NJ DEP permits that they need for the riparian. In terms of landscaping and lighting, they've suggested that the final plan be reviewed by the board's landscape subcommittee, and they suggest that the applicant develop a plan for the emerald ash borer as well. They've suggested that an evergreen buffer between the middle school and the parking lot and Great Road be more enhanced, that the ice rink loading area be screened from Great Road if it remains there, that lighting in high-use areas should be on timers and only lit when needed. The Municipal Shade Tree Commission had a few comments. They noted that the rain gardens are in appropriate locations. They've asked that a maintenance plan for the porous pavement be provided, that the planting plan meet the ordinance requirements, and I think that has to do with trees and parking lots, and that fringe trees susceptible to emerald ash borers should be replaced. Traffic safety indicated they did not believe there's a need for the driveway out or the Great Road West entrance. PEC had a number of comments. The first I need to share with you is that they do have reservations and recommending approval of the application due to concerns regarding the disruption of wetlands. In terms of the landscape, they suggest that the applicant find alternative locations for disruptive activities in wetlands, wetlands transition areas, and riparian zones, that the applicant coordinate tree protection with site utilities, and they use appropriate soil remediation measures and develop an IPM, integrated pest management plan. Regarding all the parking, they've suggested that the applicant provide a pervasive argument for increasing the parking. They should consider relocating the lower school parking lot to behind Colrose. I'm going to use sheet CE1, which is PB1. Colrose, I gotta get my bearings, is located over here. So the parking lot is to the north of that. Colrose is a older building on the campus. I think it's used for administrative purposes. They've suggested the applicant consider incorporating bioswales in the parking area, providing additional rain gardens in the lower school parking lot, provide a maintenance plan for the porous pavement, that they should include an electrical vehicle charging station in the lots, consider canopy solar panels for the existing parking lot near the Baker Field. For all flat roofs, solar should be considered, and/or green roofs. General building, they have a series of comments that there's a need to provide covered and secure bike parking, that the applicant should provide containers for trash recycling and organic as well. They should evaluate ultra-high efficient toilets. All exterior light fixtures should have full cutoffs and timers. LED lamps should be used. Energy Star appliance and windows should be used during construction. That the applicant use ASHRAE 90.1-2010 instead of the 2007 or a more current version of what's currently required. That they should use FCS lumber, avoid any of the red list materials, and they provide a list of those. Use green building materials and finishes, and provide an indoor air quality management plan. That's a summary of the staff reports, as well as the advisory committees. Brian Stankus, our traffic engineer, is here. Jack West, the land use engineer, and Derek Bridger, the zoning officer. I don't know if you guys wanted to add anything to this, or if we'll take questions from the board.
Could we swear all these gentlemen in at once first before they answer questions?
Gentlemen, if you would raise your right hands, affirm your testimony this evening will be truthful.
I do.
Thank you.
I do.
Any?
And no additional comments. I think Lee covered everything. If you have any specific questions regarding our comments, we'll go over them.
Right. Mr. Bridger? Nothing?
I don't have anything to add, thank you. Likewise.
All right, are there any? Yes, there seem to be questions for Mr. Solo. Do you want to start, Ms. Ullman?
Yeah, Traffic Safety Committee and staff have recommended that the new access road from the Great Road West to the loading area not be put in. Could you show that to us on the map and explain?
Okay, so I'm going to use sheet CE20, which is PB4. And what we're all talking about, this is Great Road West out here to the right. Great Road East is further over to the right. Currently, there is a small driveway that comes into the back of the ice rink to service it. In this proposal, it's being more formalized. It's going to get a little larger, and that's shown here in this light gray. And what we were all suggesting is, if possible, that rather than coming in through here and clearing this area, and what we were concerned with is sort of the view shed for the residential properties, that maybe they could come in somewhere off of this Campus Road Drive, even if they need to get here, but just to remove that area from there. It does violate the loading setback of 75 feet. So we'd like to see it come off somewheres here.
So you're recommending that even the existing
Correct.
driveway be eliminated?
Right. I think there may be some concern with the Zamboni, but the applicant will address that. I'm not quite certain what that.
Yes, Mr. West?
Just a clarification, there actually is not an existing driveway that comes off of Great Road. It's all internally. They're proposing a new one, but there's no existing coming off of Great Road.
Yes. Go ahead.
Mr. Solo, on page 5, I don't think you need to turn there, but in your presentation, you referred to a walking area that the applicant, you use the word that will be normalized. Is that your word, their word?
That was my word. I don't know how to
Okay,
describe
but, so my question is, exactly what does normalized mean?
They have a narrow roadway to begin with there. It's two-way traffic, I believe. And what they've done is, on that narrow drive, they've taken 3 feet, Jack, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably maybe
And put
a little more.
concrete bumper blocks that normally you'd have like in a parking lot to stop the car from overhanging onto the sidewalk every couple of feet or so to demarcate the pedestrian from the car. They're going to formalize that. Is it a timber rail? I'm forgetting. Timber rail, and they'll go into more detail, will be there. To do that, I think there's some minor widening of that roadway pathway system. So when I say normalize, it's going to get more formal. Observation was there's a fair amount of traffic back and forth between the ice rink, probably even more when it becomes a field house. They do have a gym with the main campus as well, but there's a fair amount of pedestrian activity, so that'll be slightly enlarged, and the applicant will speak to exactly, I don't even know if it's feet, but, and then formalized with a railing to protect pedestrians.
Thank you.
My question relates to the very brief mention in your report that they're looking for, the applicant is looking for an extended period of protection on its site plan approval. And I guess I want to, my assumption would be that if code regulations change over the period of time, the 10 years that this master plan is supposed to apply, that they would not be grandfathered if, for instance, stormwater regulations change, or site lighting regulations change, or wetlands protection regulations change. I would hope that we're not locking ourselves into, today's current regulations by approving the site plan for an extended period.
I'm not certain about the state regulations. This would, typically the period of protection refers to zoning changes, but if there are wetland changes, now they will have a wetlands permit, and I think I'm going to defer to the applicant to answer. It's a good question. I don't know, Karen, whether you wanted to chime in.
I would agree with what you said, that normally this vesting period or protective period is designed to protect the applicant against zoning changes. I think if there are changes for safety and health, which is how I would categorize what you're referring to, and particularly, the state, of course, what they regulate, we're preempted from addressing what they regulate. But that's certainly how I would interpret the vesting period. And there are two provisions of the municipal land use law which allow you to use your discretion to extend the vesting. I've asked Mr. Letizia to address them when he presents his case so that you can consider the criteria for giving them. I think normally they'd have 5 years, so they would like 10. So that's something that the applicant will review with you tonight.
I mean, another example I just thought of, I should have thought of sooner since I'm on the Bike Advisory Committee, but, you know, our master plan, hopefully, within a year, will have a bicycle element to it that currently isn't required, and I did notice in some of the comments that the applicant was asked to consider the bicycle master plan, even though it's not adopted yet. But I would be reluctant to grant a 10-year waiver, that they didn't have to abide by the bicycle master plan. Doesn't seem to be any reason why, if we can get that in place, they shouldn't have to come back and comply with it.
Well, I would say perhaps it'd be best to hear from the applicant with regard to the position on the bicycle path as well as the whole issue of vesting, and then the board can decide whether you think they've made the case in your discretion for 10 years.
Anyone else?
If not, thank you, and we'll turn it over to the applicant.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Solo.
Good evening, Tom Letizia, attorney with Pepper Hamilton, representing Princeton Day School. Just some housekeeping. This is actually a continuation of a hearing that began on October 20th. The board only took jurisdiction at that time and carried it without any further notice being required. So I believe the board does have jurisdiction to proceed this evening. Just a little background. Some of you may recall that we appeared before you in May of last year with a concept plan for these improvements, which, as noted by Mr. Solo, are long-term capital improvements that the school would like to implement over what they believe will be at least a 10-year period based on the availability of funds, and we'll provide a little more information about what the timing is. At that time, we believe the board found the plan to be excellent. In fact, I recall many members complimented our team for employing very sensitive design to the site plan in order to minimize impacts to the environmental sensitive areas of the campus, as well as taking into account, as you all know, that this is already a well-developed campus. Those goals and objectives have been maintained in this formal submission, which we will go into some detail for you. As noted by Mr. Solo, the plan conforms with your zoning in all respects, except in two instances in what we believe are minor deviations. The size of parking stalls, we are proposing a 9 by 18 instead of your required 9 by 19. That is relief you normally grant. The main benefit is it's less impervious coverage overall, given the number of parking spaces that are being proposed. And the setback for the, what actually already exists, but this will be more formalized, the loading area for the ice ring, it does encroach within the 75-foot setback, and we'll explain. Originally, there were some signs proposed for the field house. You may have noticed them on your plans. We will withdraw any requests related to the signage. We really haven't provided enough details with respect to the signage. That will be something for a later application if the signage that ultimately is designed for the building does not meet your ordinance. As was noted, this is a preliminary final site plan, and We are also seeking what is commonly known as extended vesting. And as Ms. Casey indicated, the municipal land use law permits the planning board, when reviewing site plan applications for tracts of 50 acres or more, to consider requests for extending the normal vesting period, which in this case would be for 2 years with the right to seek 3 one-year extensions, or a total of 5 years. As we were going to explain, this is a plan that's going to be implemented over essentially a decade. And in order for the school to raise funds, have a budget and raise funds and go to donors to support these projects, they need to have some sense that the general terms and conditions of this approval is not going to be dramatically altered during that period. And that's why we're seeking the extended vesting. To answer the question about what protections are granted, it only relates to municipal ordinances. We do not gain any protections from any county, state, or regional requirements. If those requirements change and we don't have permits that grandfather these projects, we'll have to seek new permits. We understand that. So the extended vesting we're seeking from this board only applies to your local zoning, no other regulations. And we are aware of the exception in the statute that if there are modifications in your zoning that you feel are necessary to serve the public health and safety, those are exceptions from the vesting. So with that, we'd like to begin the presentation. We have 5 witnesses tonight. I've told all of them to be as brief as possible because Mr. Solo has done an excellent job of going over a lot of the information, but we'll just sort of fill in some of the details. Now, also, you may have a sense from your packet that there's an extensive amount of comments, and there are a number of reports, but I can advise you that for the most part, we're in agreement with the comments. There are no major disagreements with these recommendations, but again, we'll go through that as quickly as possible to point out where we might have some need for further clarification or where we just cannot implement those recommendations. So with that, unless there's some questions for me, we'd like to begin. Okay?
Go ahead.
So our first witness we'll call Paul Stellato. Paul?
So we'll just swear you in. If you would raise your right hand, do you swear affirm your testimony this evening will be truthful?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Paul Stellato, head of school at Princeton Day School, and glad to be back to talk about these projects. As Mr. Letizia said, this is a 10-year project at Princeton Day School, which actually began about 5 years ago, a planning process that began in September of 2011 with the Board of Trustees and me to try to outline and plan for the future of our school. At that time, in addition to the projects that we have before you tonight, I and the board endorsed the fundamental qualities of the school, which are several. One is that we will remain a day school. We believe that our being a day school is and always has been an essential quality of the school, and that the enrollment on campus would, at that point, was an enrollment that was optimal for the school. We believe that being a school with enrollment, a pre-K through 12 school with enrollment between 925 and 950 is optimal for our program, and we are within those targets right now, and these projects anticipate that enrollment. Largely, what we're thinking about at Princeton Day School is accommodating and enhancing student experience. And I think especially as we look at the athletic center and our tennis courts, while enrollment is vigorous, interest in the school is dynamic, Participation, though, has increased dramatically just in my 9 years at school, and we offer a interscholastic athletic program in grades 6 through 12. In the current winter season, about 90% of our middle schoolers, so more than 200 middle schoolers, are involved in interscholastic athletics in 2 gymnasiums and the ice rink, which has forced us actually to modify our academic schedule. And though I like and appreciate athletics, the idea of, as the head of school, my having to modify academic program and academic schedule to accommodate our athletic program is an anathema to me, and I believe that our building these facilities or enhancing these facilities will accommodate that. In a similar way, we have seen extraordinary growth in the program in the upper school. We have no requirements for athletics in middle or upper school, and yet in our upper school, in this winter season, more than 50% of our students are participating in interscholastic athletics, again, in 2 gymnasiums and 1 rink. So we may see future growth within the athletic program, but certainly for us to accommodate what we are seeing today, we simply need more space, and we believe that the projects that we are asking you to look at will allow us to run the program that is consistent with the school's mission. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Salata?
I don't know if somebody else will want to answer this, but it seems like an appropriate question for you. I think a lot of the comments related to how much parking is being provided in this new plan, and since you're familiar with the operation of the school program, I assume you can shed some light on how you chose the numbers of spaces, and more specifically, it seems a little bit puzzling to me that there's such a slight increase in the parking by the field. You know, you've got a building with a major addition, it's doubling in size, and it's only getting 6 extra parking spaces, and yet, you know, you're building a whole bunch of more spaces over by the tennis courts. So if you can reflect a little bit on how you made those decisions.
So, and I'm sure my colleagues will answer this question much more effectively than I will. So as I live on campus. I live next to the tennis courts and facing the rink, so I'm intimately familiar with the area. The tennis courts, I think the parking is designed to accommodate both the tennis courts, but also below the tennis courts, and I'm not sure in which direction, but below the tennis courts there are broad fields for our athletic program, which really do not have much parking at all. So, but there is a road, and I believe a road that will be retained that will move from the north side of the campus down to those fields. So I think we can accommodate more visitors to campus for both the tennis program and also those fields. We're not, we're adding to the gym facility, the athletic facility. We're not, as far as program recommending an increase to the size of the program. We're not going to be adding teams. We're simply going to relieve pressure on the use of gyms in the building. So we don't anticipate that we're going to be bringing more cars onto our campus. They're already there. They're just in different places on campus at this point.
So, for instance, I see in the field house basketball courts.
Yes.
And it's connected to the ice rink, both winter sports, but the events don't take place at the same time? Or
so the rink will remain as it should, not only place for practice but for competition. But what we anticipate is that much of the competition will remain in the upper gymnasium in the main building. So we have 2 gyms in our main building. The upper gymnasium on the top level will remain our competition boys varsity and girls varsity basketball court. So much of the use of the field house during the day will be for practice with students already on campus. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you.
Now I'd like to call Mark Brahaney.
Mr. Brahaney will swear you in. Do you swear affirm your testimony this evening will be truthful?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just say, I'll be brief. I'll offer a few comments that supplement Lee's description, which was quite thorough. Thank you. And also supplement Paul's comments.
And Mark, maybe you can tell the board your association with the school.
I should do that. So I am on the board. I've been on the board for a number of years, and I chair a committee that has been quite involved.
I'm sorry, we're not picking you up.
Okay. I am on the board. I am chair of a committee on the Buildings and Grounds, under the Buildings and Grounds Group, that has been working on these projects for ever since Paul had the notion that the school should pursue them. So my group, my committee group has been consulting with the faculty, staff members, and our hired consultants to develop these projects. All of the projects we're presenting to you are designed to help us better fulfill our mission of educating our students. And as you've heard already from Paul, we are focused on our current student population. We are not proposing these projects as a plan to increase our student population. I'll say a few things about each of the projects that you've heard about so far. I'll start with this sort of more nuts and bolts project of the lower school access. You've already heard that we have a queuing problem with cars coming to campus, especially the lower school families coming to campus, and especially in the afternoon pickup time. And we are proposing to solve that by creating more roadway on campus to allow our lower school families to segregate off from middle and upper school families, and thereby have a queuing space so that they can wait for their children to come out. The parking component of that project is designed mostly for the morning traffic. We find that lower school families are significantly different than middle and upper school families in that the lower school family, the middle and upper school families want to drop and go. The lower school families want to park and in many cases walk their children in. That's often because parents are quite involved in the school programming in the lower school. They might want to connect with the teacher. So there's a lot of instances when those families want to park. The current parking we have for them is not that closely located to the lower school, and it's positioned in a way that those families have to cross multiple lines of traffic to get to the lower school.
Can you please speak closer to the microphone?
Okay. How's this? I think that's it for the lower school comments. The tennis center is an example of a program that we currently have on campus. We have 8 tennis courts. We find that our program would be best run with 10 tennis courts, so we're proposing to add 2 courts. We also do not have significant parking over by the tennis courts, and also we're lacking parking for the fields that are below the tennis courts. That's the impetus for proposing the new parking lot over there. We have positioned it in a way that we feel it will serve multiple purposes. It will serve tennis and those lower fields, and that it will also be close enough to the new field house that it will serve that use as well. And our third project is the field house. That's the big one. We are addressing a severe space shortage for those programs. For example, we just don't have enough court space to run our athletic practices. in a way that gets our children all home in time, in a timely fashion for a good family dinner. We, as another example, we have a fencing program, but we don't have a designated space for the fencers to practice. This additional field house will provide that. And then last, we have a very robust squash program, where we have no on-site squash courts. We currently rent just 2 squash courts off campus, and it's just not nearly enough. So the field house, as proposed, will have 6 new squash courts. I think maybe I should say something about the parking that we're proposing. It might seem unusual that an applicant is actually asking to have more parking than the code requires. We are basing the increased parking spaces we're proposing on our actual experience. We have found over the years our campus has become a very popular place. Our athletic programs have become very popular. We have a number of times during the year when our own families come to campus in a big way, and there are just too many cars to be accommodated by our current number of parking spots. We also have very heavy usage of our campus on weekends by outside groups. We feel that this is a bit of a community service. What we're also finding that those folks who come to campus, there aren't enough spaces for them either, and they are parking everywhere they can, including popping curbs and parking in wooded areas and on grass lawns, and it makes it very hard for us to maintain our campus as we would like to maintain it in a way that we feel we would be good stewards of our campus. I think that's it for parking, my comments on parking.
Mark, maybe you can comment a little bit about the 10-year vesting that we're seeking and
Sure.
why you feel that's important for these projects.
Right, well, you and Lee have mentioned that we plan to build these projects as we have funds available. If we had all of the funds in hand now, we would build all of these projects now. The fact of the matter is that fundraising these days takes years. We have been planning our fundraising strategy ever since we started to think about these projects, but we haven't been able to go live to significant donors until we've developed the projects sufficiently that we understand them, and we're in a position to bring them to you so that you can approve them, so then we can go with confidence to these donors to seek funding. Donors don't want to give to a project that might not win approval. The actual fundraising campaign will, once it kicks off, will take years, and so we think that it's going to take us 10 years to execute these projects.
Yes, Ms. Holman?
Yes. The question of PDS and cars has always been a thorny problem, and I note that if only 15% of your kids are coming by bus, 85% of them are coming and leaving in separate car trips. So I'm sort of curious about the flow of that. Do your sports go on after hours? I mean, or are they contained during the school hours? Do the kids stay on campus until the evening and get picked up then? I mean, how does it work?
Well, the others Paul might be able to say more about this, but yeah, reality is there's a long continuum of, especially at the end of the day, the pickup routine. So many students are staying for after-class programs, whether those are club meetings. There are many, many more clubs now than there used to be. We have a very robust theater program, so there are theater practices after classes end, and then all of our sports programs, of course, hold their practices after classes end. And then there are the days when there are games that are being played, so students are doing all of those after classes as well.
And so parents are arriving into the early evening?
They're arriving in the early evening, on game days, they're arriving to be spectators and then leaving after the game is over. But yes, there's a sort of continuum of arrivals, picking up, and then departing.
And are any of your high school students allowed to park on campus?
Yes, once they have their license, they are allowed to apply for parking.
So
Parking
that would include, on average, how many additional to staff parking places would you require?
I don't know the answer to that. I think other people can speak to the numbers better than I can.
I'm sort of fussing because you are going to be paving over another 3 acres.
Mhm.
Porous paving, Tom's going to explain to us why that works. And it's all a very sensitive area.
Mhm.
The school does have an ongoing problem with traffic. I don't think you've ever really solved that problem. And so to suddenly be asking again for more parking places, there's just a little bit of discontinuity in that for me. I think your plan is a good one, but I'm not sure I understand all of it.
Well, the congestion, I think, is mostly arrival and pickup, and it's especially driven by that lower school traffic that queues up and backs out onto Great Road. So the additional loop road that we're creating will, per our traffic consultant, solve that problem. In terms of the number of parking spaces, we just have found that we have people parking illegally, I guess you'd call it. I mean, we don't ticket them, but they're parking off paved surfaces all over the place. And so we feel we have to do something to control that.
I was sure that creating more parking places is the best solution to that problem, but
Well, we've also tried to get families to carpool. We've encouraged people to sign up for bus service. There are just limits to what...
You have to do something more than encourage it, because it doesn't seem to have worked.
Well, I agree, those efforts have not led to a reduction in the traffic. We're faced with a big challenge. Yeah. And I think that challenge has grown, as I said, as we have opened our campus up to other groups to use it, which we think is a good community service. So we want to continue that.
Could I just ask about these other groups? This is mostly on weekends, I'm presuming.
That's one of the heavy use times, yes.
Do you have an approximate number of people who, I mean, we hear the numbers of your staff and students and so on. How many people use your campus on weekends?
I don't have those numbers, but hopefully somebody else with us tonight can give you something a little bit on that.
But it is a substantial number, and I've been out there on weekends and noticed parking all over the place, so I assume that...
Paul lives on campus, as he mentioned, and I think he's said that he sees some horrendous parking attempts, even in his front yard.
Yes, I would think that would be something that you'd want a solution for.
Well, we're trying, yes.
Anyone else? Julie?
Well, I just had a question, not related to parking, but about the landscape. I don't know if the board talked about the big change in there's 331 trees being removed, and then potentially with the ash trees that, we'll probably lose, that's 480 trees, and if the vision for how to cope with that came up in the planning of all this.
Yes, the landscape groups have, and we want to develop a plan to deal with that ongoing and increasingly bad situation. We, I think, are committing to continuing to work with the landscape committee to develop a plan that is more substantive than what we have right now. It's a bit of a moving target, and given that we're executing over a 10-year time frame, I don't know that we can lock in right now to a specific plan, but we are eager to develop one. I can tell you we budget a substantial amount of money every year simply to remove trees that are dying and that we think present a safety problem. We'd like to reach a point where we can turn that money, focus that money away from removal of dead trees toward an ongoing program to supplement and plant new trees per a plan.
I'd like to go back to the traffic issues a little bit more. I understand 15% of the students come by bus, but about how many buses is that a day, and what kinds of buses? Are these little sort of enhanced vans, or are they full-fledged school buses?
I think other people will have to answer that question better than I can, but I know it's a mixture of buses. Some are the full boat buses, and others are the smaller scale, and I believe it depends on where that bus is going to pick students.
And do you know if it's mostly the lower school kids who are coming by bus, or is it all different ages?
I think it's all different ages.
Okay. All right, I'll wait for the other one.
One of our challenges also is that I think we're finding, I think Paul could corroborate this, we're finding that we are drawing students from an ever wider geographic area. So, that in part also drives more traffic. As you sort of expand the area, your student group is a less densely, lives ever more dispersed, and so that means
harder carpool.
More cars, hopefully carpools, and probably less buses.
And I guess the one other question, in terms of, reading through the environmental checklist, there was some discussion about trying to encourage multimodal, sort of bicycling and that kind of stuff. I didn't really see too much on the plan that physically represented that interest or commitment. Can you talk a little bit about what the school's trying to do to enhance that?
Some of the folks who are going to testify are going to talk about those issues and those questions.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to Mr. O'Shea. Tom?
Mr. O'Shea, will swear in, do you swear or affirm your testimony this evening will be truthful?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Shea has testified with this board numerous times and has been accepted as an expert in civil engineering. I can go through his qualifications again if you'd like.
I think we accept his credentials.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to try to be brief, and you can stop me when you want to. The first thing that we have on the site is the property in question. It's 4 lots, and it's 102 acres. The Great Road is located to the right-hand side, and the Old Great Road, or what I call Old Great Road, or Great Road West, is up north. Now, the 2 main drainage swales, intermittent swales that run through the site, are shown in blue. And back in 2008, the state declared Stony Brook from Hopewell to a portion in Princeton Category 1 stream that then created a 300-foot buffer on that. And that was one of our early challenges. I can go into more detail about it, but we've worked with the state and the town extensively on this, and we actually have our DEP permits. We have very little disturbance to wetlands. Our disturbance to wetlands are less than 2,000 square feet, and that is associated with the stormwater outfall and with a road crossing for the lower middle school. The riparian buffer, that's the 300-foot that is placed on the site. The whole campus is essentially encompassed by that. And if you recall at the concept meeting when Bill Wolf stood up, he said this was a fine example of a mature campus and you're really doing infill. And the 3 projects really touch on the periphery of that 300-foot buffer. Again, we have approvals for that, and we have to provide mitigation and planting for that, which is not under the landscape plan. but as part of our DEP plan. Based on the hour tonight, I don't know if you want to go into more detail with that, but we do have the permits for that. Again, we worked with the state and the town heavily on these impacted areas. They've been relatively minor, and both those impacts and stormwater management were compliant with the municipal and state regulations. Now, one of the questions you talked about the vesting and what happens to the permitting, we do this routinely. ETS, we've got a 20-year master plan there. The DEP permitting, the one that I just described, is good for 5 years. That is non-renewable. So if we don't build the projects within that time frame, we have to go and get new permits. And if the stormwater regulations change at that time, we have to update the stormwater regulations. That's what we do. I'll tell you that for another client, in looking at master planning, long-term master planning, I've had conversations with the DEP and I've asked them pointedly, do you see anything on the near horizon that the regulations are going to change relative to stormwater management, infiltration, peak rate reductions, water quality? And the statement was, I don't see anything at this point. Now, with regard to the stormwater management, because we are in the C1 designation, we have enhanced stormwater management, and our water quality has a 90% TSS removal horizon. So I hope that's a good enough explanation as to what we did with the town and the state with the approvals, and I'd like to move on for the rest of the project and go through my presentation.
Mr. O'Shea, do you want to mark this as an exhibit?
What I'll do, I'll give the
whole
PowerPoint to Eileen.
So I believe, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, we have 17 slides.
17 slides. They're not all my slides. We'll get into the architecture of the building. What I propose to do is do lower middle school to tennis to the field house and then turn over to the architect of the field house.
So if you want, Ms. Casey, we can just mark the entire slide set if you want any one, what we've done in the past.
And really, these are renderings of plans that are in the packet. So now on the property, we've outlined the 3 projects. We do show lower middle school next to Great Road, the field house next to Old Great Road, and Jack is correct. We don't currently have an access out onto Old Great Road. We heard the staff loud and clear. We heard SPRAB loud and clear, and we're not going to connect out onto Old Great Road. We will connect internally over what we're calling Campus Drive, and I'll show you that. Just one other thing, this walkway, if you haven't been there, I just remember how Great Road was and the sidewalk there and how we had the curb stops along there that separated the sidewalk from the roadway. Actually, when we did the plan for Princeton Day School in the early 2000s, Princeton Day School at that time worked with the town because the road was being redone and contributed to creating a separate multi-purpose path raised with curb at that location. So we see this connection from the main academic campus to the athletic facility. We're going to give them a little bit more protection, so we have a guide rail there. We didn't do it with, I'm losing control. We didn't do it with raised curb because as part of the stormwater management plan with the state, we didn't want to create concentrated flow, so that water runs across the roadway through vegetated areas, so we're leaving the flow patterns the same. The other project, the tennis is actually outside of the riparian buffers. I don't know why I'm moving here. Outside the riparian buffers, so I'll go into that in detail. But since the computer's telling me we want to take a look at lower middle school, why don't we do that? Lower Middle School has 41 spaces, great road. There was a comment, why not put parking behind Cole Ross? I don't know why it's moving on me. Why don't we put some of the parking behind Cole Ross? We don't want to do that for a couple of reasons. One, we don't want the students walking across the traffic way to get to the Lower Middle School, but that field behind Cole Ross is used for graduation, so we don't want to create parking there. So with this project, we have 41 spaces, 21 of which are in a porous pavement parking lot, and then we have 10 parallel spaces on the east side of the loop, and then we have 7 parallel spaces that we're calling queuing spaces that then access the 3 drop-off spaces in front of the building. The amphitheater handicap ramp is located in this area. Bill Wolf asked us to take a look at whether we can leave that handicap ramp as is, and with the reconfiguration of the walks and the elevations, we have to rebuild that handicap ramp. Tom Letizia talked about the variances. We have the variances with the parking sizes here. We're going with 9 by 18 versus the 9 by 19. The parallel spaces meet township code.
Tom, can I just break in for a second and ask you to talk a little bit more about how the queuing works on the west side of the driveway? Because I'm a little bit concerned with those marked parallel parking spaces that you get a parent coming in there and parking, and then not being able to flow through with the queuing. So,
David, we're working with George Akmar as part of the traffic component, and you'll hear from George later on tonight, is the queuing, he wants it signed so that there is no parking during AM and PM peak hour at that location, so that there's a constant flow. We do have walkways connecting. Again, the entrance is at this location. So we feel that we have adequate walkways picking up the parallel parking, picking up the parking lot, and we do have a perimeter walk to the west which connects. There was a comment about extending that walk up to the parkway, but we don't want to do it at this point because we don't think it's going to be used, but we'll be committed to doing that if we find that people are using that. People are gravitating to the entrance as opposed to around, so we really thought that out.
Do you feel like you really need all 41 of these parking spaces?
I think that's really going to help because that's really been the problem, David, is that we don't have room for those people, that they're stopping, dropping off, and that's causing the backup. So again, I'll let George talk about the parking numbers and we'll go through that. So stormwater, again, compliant with the town, compliant with the state. This portion of the area has rain gardens, pervious pavement, stone storage underneath it, and we have a manufactured treatment device to provide the water quality that we need in the C1 area. The lighting is going to be LED lighting, and we're committed to have the lights on timers, in particular when we get over by the tennis court area. If we're not using that area at night, those lights are off. As far as the path connecting the academic campus to the athletic facility, we are going to formalize that. I think we use the term normalize it, but we're going to protect both students and teachers walking in that area, and we have new lighting there as well. Again, LED. It connects to a raised crosswalk crossing Campus Road. One of the comments that we have is we don't want to over-sign on campus. So at each of the crosswalks, which there are many on campus, we don't want to have the crossing sign and the advancing crossing sign because they'd be tripping over each other with the sign. So we've asked for relief with that, and I think we have support from staff. There has been a comment relative to the connection to the field house, and I'll go through that when we get there.
Could I interrupt you just a moment? It's 20 to 11, and I just wanted to ask what you think the future holds for this. He keeps saying he's going to speak about something later. this board generally doesn't stay after 11 o'clock, so I think that probably we should take stock of where we are and where we're going at this point. I assume that you have a fair bit more for your presentation to go. Is that correct?
Much time.
I can be done in less than 15 minutes.
Right, but that doesn't, you have other people to present too.
I think our remaining witnesses will be about 15 minutes at most. But then obviously there'll have to be questions. But in terms of direct presentation.
All right, board members, where do you want to go with this? Do you want to try to finish?
Yeah, I don't see lots, I think it seems doable.
Anyone feel differently? Yes or no?
We aim for 11:30?
Oh, I think 11:30 is more than the outside.
Is what? 11:30 is what?
More than, she said to aim for 11:30 at the outside. I think that's probably too long, so.
Right. I mean, I thought we got 15 plus 10, 15, right? So that's
10 after.
Yeah.
Quarter after.
But maybe they could even be shorter, a little shorter.
Shorter.
Okay.
Like we don't have any members of the public left. Don't worry about that.
Yes, we do need to discuss, and we need to tick off the things in the memos that you are not going to do in addition to the presentation. So, well, let's continue. Let's go on. Let's not.
Thank you.
So here's a rendering of the existing tennis courts. You can see the proposed court in the upper corner with the field house and ice rink and the parking lot. Again, the tennis courts are not lit, not proposed to be lit. The new court not lit, and we have lighting in the parking lot, and again, we'll be on timers for that. Trying to get it to move. There you go. Thank you. So another view of the new tennis court, and now we get into the site plan. Parking lot is porous pavement. The sidewalks that we have spoken about is the one that runs vertically through the center of the parking lot. We will take that straight down to the tennis court. The ADA ramp for the site getting down to the tennis court does come from the left-hand side diagonally down to the page, and we can rework the basin. So stormwater management for the site is porous pavement, stone storage underneath it, a small little collection area in the triangle space, and a manufactured treatment device, and discharging down by the stream, which is just off the rendering. There is a connection from this parking lot to the field, and it's suggested just north of the proposed tennis court, and you'll see that on the next plan. The house that Mr. Stiletto was talking about is the one that's just off the page there. So this then picks up the walk on the left-hand side. This is now the field house. Stormwater management here is porous pavement, stone storage underneath, manufactured treatment device. There was a connection or a concern from SPRAB to connect the entryway to the south off of Campus Road to the front of the building, and we'll do a mulch path there so that now we have a complete circuit that goes from the academic campus to the building, connecting to the front of the building, and then over to the parking lot over by the tennis. Because of the reconfiguration of the parking lot, we're only adding 6 spaces in this location, but the parking lot over at the tennis feeds this area, feeds the lower athletic fields that we were talking about before, and we do think they'll be used. You do see at this location the suggestion of the entry into the loading area behind the ice rink, so we will come off of Campus Road. We will eliminate the drive out to Great Road West, and this is the source of one of the other variances that we're asking for. We're not increasing this area, but this area currently violates the 75-foot buffer off of Great Road, and we're going to add some more landscaping at this location.
Tom, it looks like you've got a little area of impervious pavement along with all the pervious pavement. Is there an explanation of why those few spaces are impervious up in the left-hand corner of the parking lot? It just looks like a different color shading there.
Yeah, that's where we go from porous pavement to regular bituminous, and the reason why we do that there, David, is we find that porous pavement doesn't hold up well where we've got turning vehicles. So we're going to have larger vehicles coming around, so at that location, we expect turning and the wheels grinding the pavement, so we normally do that now with regular pavement. It's all interconnected underground, though. As far as the impervious surface that's being added, the 3 acres, about half of it is building area. Again, we meet the criteria as far as TSS removals and water quality. So there was a comment about this walk. You see the right angle walk. They want that softened. The staff suggested that being softened, and we will. As part of the team, we have Andrew Pogon doing the landscape architecture. They're here tonight, but we would ask that this would be reviewed by the landscape subcommittee. And my recollection, and Tom can tell me if I'm getting this incorrect, it was my understanding at SPRAB when we were talking about the trees and the emerald ash borer is that we don't know what the impact is, but we do know that there's a lot of ash out on this campus. And what we committed to is to work with the landscape subcommittee and develop a plan, and that plan would be reviewed with each CO of the 3 projects. So it's something that will be reviewed over time, and I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, we talk about this campus as a campus in the woods, and it's important for us to save the trees as well. I think that is my presentation of the site civil, stormwater management permitting, and our comment about the extended vesting and how we normally handle that, David, is the permitting has a time frame to it, and when we renew that permitting, we have to bring things up to date.
Okay, any further questions for Mr. O'Shea?
I guess just make sure that he's not the one who was going to talk about the bicycle facilities, since Mark said somebody was going to.
Let me touch on the bicycles. So we don't get a lot of bicycles on campus. We have bike racks on campus. They're underutilized, and our commitment is that we will move those bike racks around as there's a need, and if there's a need for more bike racks, we will. We have the community master plan for the bikeway has Great Road, has the sidewalk and multi-purpose path that we talked about. At the intersection where there is the signal, there is a crosswalk at that location. In working with staff, we suggested, and I think they agreed, they can comment, is we don't want bicycles riding through campus during particularly morning and afternoon pickups. If we do have people coming, we will sign it for dismounting your bike at that location and go to your designated area. That's something very similar elsewhere in town, where you dismount the bike before you go someplace else.
I had a question. It looks like on the bike plan, there's also like a pipeline easement that goes through campus.
There's a what easement?
Yes.
And
the pipeline?
The pipeline, and that's a proposed bike path, potentially. I think the issue is that the pipeline companies don't have the use easements. It's all the individual owners. So, I mean, that's the pipe dream for.
Okay.
Because they're great off-road connections that go all over town, and it would be the most beautiful bike network if we can get the permission. So, I would love to see some language in there, if we're able to connect it up, that that...
That's nothing that I can commit to, but I'm sure that others would respond. That pipeline is on the old Wynette property that the school owns, and it's a variable easement. It goes from 100 feet down to 60 and then runs through Pondview and down towards... Your feeling about if the town can get the approvals to, I guess, allow people to ride bicycles from, that's Transco, Williams Company, if to ride bicycles over that, would the school be opposed to that?
During the school day?
I think it would, if the town does it, you would want to do it all the time. It's not through campus, right? It's right by where the fire lane is that gets on the south side of the building, so it's on the Wynette property. Yeah. Well, I hope I can. Yeah, thank you. Going the wrong way. Here we are. So you can see the properties to the south. You see the dashed lines going through. So you have the old, what I still refer to as the Wynette property. And you see the circuitous road. That's the fire lane to get to the rear of the site. But you can see the diagonal line going through the site. That's the Transco line.
Right, the reason I'm raising it's on our master plan, that's a draft, but that, I think we're likely to approve some version of it, so that's the one thing where it's like, it's already there, it's been on the website, we've been discussing it for the past year, and that's something I just know that's going to be coming up.
I'll just say that Transco's pretty tough. You know, we've done a lot of work over and around, and approvals through them are very difficult. But I'm all for it.
On the other piece of property we were working on, they were open to it, but they couldn't grant us the permission because they didn't have the,
They only had an easement.
they had the easement for their own use, but they didn't have an easement for public use.
Any other questions?
Yes, anyone? Okay.
Call our architect, Steve, I'll get the last name wrong, Dadagian? Close enough.
You want me to?
Sit here.
Yeah.
Sir, we'll swear you in if you would raise your right hand.
Sure.
Do you swear or affirm your testimony this evening will be truthful?
I do.
Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? All right. My name's Steve Dadagian. I'm the architect for the Field House. I work at Architectural Resources Cambridge, ARC in Boston. And the drawings I'm going to show you today are our schematic design documents. So I thought I'd run you through the building quickly. This is the bird's eye view of the Field House. I should say before we get into too much detail in the drawings, we as a design team and the client are going to register this project under LEED version 4. We're not sure what target we're going to go for yet. It's a new system. It's a little more rigorous than version 3. We're going to go for, under version 3, we were going to go for gold. Version 4, where it's uncertain. So a lot of the comments in the building section addressing sustainability, we're going to be addressing most, if not all, of those issues, including bike racks. So this 3D view is showing how we really made an effort to break down the mass of the building into its component parts. The main parts being the field house at the far side, the gable roof
closest to us is the 6 squash courts. And the flat roof joining all the pieces together is over the main lobby space. We are trying to maximize natural daylighting in the facility, so you notice that we have a main skylight on the flat roof over the lobby. We have skylights over the squash and ribbon skylights in the field house, and the goal there is to minimize the use of our LED lighting system. In terms of materials, we have standing seam metal roofs. On the field house, we're going to be doing a insulated metal panel. There's a large area there, and but for the squash building, we're going to be upgrading the materials there to a masonry. We have entrances on the south facing the main campus. We've created overhangs, protected entrances at both the south and our entrance on the west that faces the parking lot. We've also integrated, we'd like to integrate some planted courtyards at those entries that would grow through the openings that you see in the roof plan. You can go to the next slide. This is a watercolor rendering of the south entry. Really doing our best to try to integrate the new with the existing hockey rink. And here you can see that we are trying to maximize the use of daylighting, lots of glass where we can spare it. And on this facade, you would see the masonry materials.
Mr. Letizia, I don't want to interrupt, but I just want to clarify, your project architect right now is not licensed in New Jersey, but he has applied, and you anticipate that he will be licensed, so that if the board approves the project, you don't have a problem with the condition of approval that your project architect needs to complete that licensing in New Jersey.
No problem with that,
Okay.
yes.
You can go to the next slide, please. This is the watercolor rendering of the west entry where we that's adjacent to the parking lot, and this will be the main drop-off point. And what you're looking at are windows into the main field house space, and you can see a little bit better the courtyard plantings at the overhangs. And, you know, we're trying to, with all this, introduce sensitive or nice-looking materials in wood and masonry down at the pedestrian level. Next one. So on the plan, again, the main components are 6 squash courts. We have a main lobby space from which you can view the squash venue. You can also, we have a platform to view hockey events. It's also going to be a community space for the school in general. It's a rather large lobby. And the idea is that you can view multiple venues at once. The field house is 3 basketball courts. It's also going to be used for volleyball, tennis. There's a walking track. It's really a multi-use facility that Paul referred to earlier. It's going to be used mostly for practice. There's a synthetic material used for the floor surface so that it can adapt to any use. On the far north end, there's a wing there where we have changing rooms for visiting and home teams, in addition to locker rooms for refs, and there's some storage and mechanical space. And this is a rendering of the lobby space. You can see the skylight. We're proposing wood ceilings throughout to tie all the pieces together. On the right is the viewing to the hockey, and the left you can see is viewing to the score, and you can see that there's transparency all the way through to the field house from here. And this is a rendering of the field house itself. You can see the ribbon skylights in the roof. We'll have LED lighting that will be on light sensors and dimmable. There's glazing out to the drop-off and into the main lobby space. And that's it. Any questions?
Anyone?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And last but not least, Mr. Giacomo.
Mr. Giacomo, if you'd raise your right hand, do you swear affirm your testimony this evening will be truthful?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is George Jacquemin. My assignment here was basically to work with the landscape architect, the site engineer, Tom, to help in designing the circulation system and parking system. We did not do a full traffic impact analysis since the number of students, the student enrollment, the number of faculty and staff does not increase as a result of this application. You should know that about 10, 12 years ago, we did do a more detailed traffic impact analysis when the school enrollment did increase. That study did lead to the traffic light that's installed today at the Great Road. And so the main purpose from a circulation point of view of this project was to alleviate the queuing, and especially the queuing that happens onto the Great Road. I observed the queuing twice, where we observed it, especially in the afternoon peak hour when parents come to pick up the kids. It tends to be a longer process than the morning peak hour. And I think my observations agree with the observations that Mr. Stankus did of the queuing. Basically what happens is, it starts at 3 o'clock, 1 minute past 3, where the queue length extends. I counted a total of 22 cars queuing up along the main driveway from the traffic light to the lower school. And then you have the 22 vehicles does include between 5 and 7 vehicles that do queue up on the road. And so when you have cars coming from the south on the Great Road, they enter, make a left turn into the site, and then because they can't get into the queue, they drive around to find a parking place. And it is, when you are there, you see it's very difficult to find a parking place. They drive into the first lot that sometimes is full, the lot that's immediately on your left when you enter, and then they drive around the other loops to find a space. So that's why we do add more parking. The 21 spaces that you see on the east side of the loop, plus the 10 spaces along the eastern leg of the loop, are there to accommodate the parents that want to park and either walk the kid to the school in the morning or pick up their kid from the school in the afternoon. There is quite a number of people that do want to pick up, that want to park and walk the kid to the school, as opposed to those people that queue up and then there's an attendant from the school that picks up the kid or drops off the kid. So this, as I mentioned, we observed a queue of 22. That was the longest queue that I saw along the main driveway and extending up about 5 to 7 cars extending on the Great Road. Now, the new loop that's proposed will accommodate between 26 and 30 cars along the loop. And then we have the additional 21 spaces plus 31 parking spaces. So the purpose of this is to basically accommodate the queuing that we see today as much as possible along that new loop, and provide more parking where parents can then park their vehicle and drop off their kid. I think the questions that were raised, are there more kids being driven to school? We don't have any precise statistics, but we do know that the queue length has increased since we did that first study. Over the last years, it seems that little by little the queue length has increased, and it's a result probably as more parents are driving their kid or caretakers are driving the kids or picking up the kid by car. We see that in other schools as well, and it is related to some degree to demographics. It's related to the fact that there are more after-school programs. It's related to the fact that kids come from a larger radius. It's more difficult to transport them by public bus, unfortunately. The only other thing I can say, the question about buses, they tend to be large buses. That's from my observation. And the buses that are serving the kids here, they do serve other schools as well. So you have a mix of students on those buses from various schools. So that's my observation. So we feel, based on the additional queuing capacity along the loop road and based on the additional parking, that will resolve the excess queue that you see today and will provide for more parking. Because if you go there in the afternoon peak hour, I've seen it now twice, you do see constantly cars driving around and looking for a parking space in order to pick up their kid. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Letizia, I know you didn't ask us to consider Mr. Jacquemart as an expert in traffic, but I believe he's testified
Many
for the board
times.
in the
Yes, he
past, so
has.
I assume the
Thank
board
you,
wants to accept
That's
him.
right, that's correct.
I started testifying in 1982 here.
So, along the loop, in addition to the parallel parking spaces, what's the travel width there, and it's one way?
The travel width, if I remember correctly, it's 8 feet for the parking spaces plus 16 feet width of pavement. So that would allow you in 18? Yeah. 8 plus 18. So there's enough width that if you have a queue that goes all the way around, there's still enough room for the second car to pass. So for instance, if a queue were to extend all the way around, there is room for a vehicle to pass and to drive into the parking lot, the 21 space parking lot to park there.
Anyone else? No? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. That completes our direct presentation, Madam Chair.
Okay, I think that we need to go through, you said that you concurred with a lot of things in the reports, but I think we need to see just where we are on the reports.
Perhaps, Mr. Letizia, it'd be or easier if you just identify what your client cannot comply with, and then the representation would be all other comments they will comply with.
Yes, I'll do that. If you just give me a moment, I'll just review my notes. There was a comment asking, well, again, we don't disagree with this, to provide additional plantings in the planting islands within the parking lot. We agree to do that, so that's no issue.
Is that 5.2?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, under Mr.
page
Solo's
3.
comments. Comment there? Okay. Again, I'm just going to highlight where we may have some disagreement. Under,
Wait a minute.
again,
You disagreed with that one, is that what you're saying? That you will not put the additional plantings in?
no, we will. We will do that, so scratch that. That's not a disagreement. The first point that I see here under the Site Plan Review Advisory Board, set of comments, 7.1A1 of Mr. Solo's report.
The ramp?
Yes, we were asked to consider demolition of the ramp, but as was testified to, due to the elevation and location, that we determined that's not feasible. Is not feasible, right. 7.1A2, it's really not a disagreement. It has to do with the location and the length of the crosswalks at the driveways. We'll agree to work with staff on adjusting those locations and the length. 7.1B3, I believe we addressed this. There was a recommendation that there be an additional pedestrian link along Campus Road between the field house and the tennis courts. We believe the path will not be used by the students, as there's already existing paths between the two areas. So we would prefer not to increase the impervious coverage for a path that's not going to be utilized that much. it's not really an area of disagreement, but just so it's clear on the record, 7.1C4, the school will consider installation of solar panels towards its LEED certification, depending on cost and effectiveness. We really can't commit to that now, but we'll agree to consider installation of solar panels. 7.1C7, as Mr. O'Shea testified to, we believe there's already a connection to the community bikeway plan, so no further improvements are necessary at this time. .1, again, as we testified to, we will modify the plans to delete access out to the Great Road. For the proposed service road access will be accomplished through the internal campus road system. So there's no disagreement on that.
And you agreed with the landscape subcommittee series of meetings?
Yes. Where am I at now? 10.1, 10.1A1 for under the Environmental Commission comments, again, as summarized by in Mr. Solo's report. We believe we've demonstrated through our testimony tonight that the school has come up with a plan that minimizes the location of disturbances within the environmentally sensitive areas, and the acquisition of the state permits confirms that. DEP would not have given us the permits unless we met their requirements in that regard. Uh, 10.1B1, we were asked to provide testimony in support of increasing parking capacity. I believe we have met that recommendation. 10.1B2, there was a request to consider moving the location of a lower school parking lot. As Mr. O'Shea testified to, the school would not like to do that because it really defeats the purpose of where the parking lot is being proposed in terms of addressing the queuing, and that area is used for graduation by the school. We were asked to consider a second rain garden in the parking area. We believe that's not needed and would only result in further disturbance to environmentally constrained areas. 10.1B6, we will consider in the future perhaps installing electric charging stations in the parking areas, but we're not proposing to do that at this time. 10.1B7, this has to do with considering installation of solar panels within the parking lots. Again, that's something that the school may consider in the future, depending on cost, feasibility, and practicality. 10.1D1, as we noted, the school currently has very few bicycle riders. Bike racks are currently exist and are not being used, but we will agree to relocate racks as needed, as the need arises in the future. And also, in order to get our LEED certification, we may have to address the bike rack issue. And then the various comments under 10.1D15A through H and 10.1D.6 through D.11, all from the Environmental Commission. All these will be considered in connection with our LEED certification, again, depending on costs and feasibility. Moving on to the Municipal Land Use Engineer and Zoning Report, dated April 22nd. Again, I'll just cite any areas of disagreement. Uh, 5.0H2, we would prefer not to install pedestrian warning signage at all the crosswalks. We believe they're not needed and will only result in visual clutter. And SPRAD did support not having warning signage. So we ask you to consider that. We were asked to consider a later start time for construction. I know this is a common request. However, PDS will abide by the current ordinance and would like to start its work at 7 a.m. One thing that's important is that we have to avoid conflicts of construction vehicles with vehicles of parents and faculty arriving. So the construction vehicles need to be on site early. As I noted, any signage you saw in some of the illustrations is being withdrawn. We're not asking for any approvals related to signage. Some of this is repetitive. 7.0, I think it's item 7. Again, this had to do with the additional pedestrian link, and we don't believe that's necessary. As was suggested by SPRAB, we would propose that curbing in all visible areas be Belgian block and curbing in lesser visible areas be concrete, with those locations to be agreed to with Mr. West. I think that's the list. Okay.
Right.
Mr. Lattizi, just one clarification.
Yes.
You're asking for 10-year vesting. I assume then that both preliminary and final will run concurrently, so you're talking about one 10-year period, not 10 years for preliminary, and then the clock starts ticking again for final.
That's correct.
Okay.
10 years from whenever the notice of decision is published.
Okay, while Karen is finishing up that, I think for pro forma, I'm going to just ask if there are any public comments to be made. Is there anyone out there? So ET will answer anyway. All right, so hearing none, let me close the public portion of the meeting. Is there any discussion, board members? Yes.
I just have a question. So the only variance you're asking for is the parking size?
It's actually two.
Okay.
Parking stall size and the loading area at the ice rink. It's existing within the 75-foot setback.
Okay.
And Mr. Lattizi, I assume you're
Yes.
proposing those as alternately a hardship, or just because you feel it's better planning for the site, either a C1, C2?
Better planning. C2.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
I'd like to revisit the question of the pipeline access that the mayor brought up before. I don't think we got an answer about whether you would consider that. It doesn't appear, from my understanding of where the pipeline crosses your campus, it's not near any academic buildings and would have a minimum impact on campus life, but would be a boon to trying to connect with other cycling networks. So,
well, what we can commit to, Mr. Quinn, at this time is to consider it. We won't, give you a categorical no at this time. But before we have more details, and exactly what the impacts would be to the campus operations. We'd like to sort of reserve, and we'll agree to have further discussions with the municipality in that regard, once you have more details and information.
Appreciate that, sir.
Mr. Letizia, one more clarification. I'd indicated at the beginning of the meeting that the MLUL gives the board the discretion to give you extended vesting periods, which I assume you're seeking. Well, I'll ask for both preliminary and final, because we've got two different statutory provisions. Preliminary, you have the right to seek it because you have more than 50 acres. That's preliminary. Final, I think you would fall into the category of having overall non-residential floor area, I believe, of over 200,000 square feet. I don't know if we've had testimony about that, but...
The total square footage, I think
I believe it exceeds that.
I think it does.
Right now, and
Mr. Roche will get that, but I believe we do meet that, yes.
Okay.
And again, just to summarize on that point, we believe, based on what you've heard tonight, that a 10-year vesting is reasonable. Obviously, you have to make that determination, what is reasonable.
I guess I would like to make an additional comment about bicycling. It's not surprising that your bike racks are underutilized if you don't allow students to ride their bikes on the campus, which is what I think I understood Mr. O'Shea to be saying the policy was going to be. The point of bringing it up is that I would like to suggest that even if we do grant the extended protection, that as the bicycle master plan is adopted, which is supposed to include an element of an ordinance for bicycle parking, that you would agree to comply with that once it's in place, even though it will be within that 10-year period that you're formally protected for.
It's kind of difficult to agree to something you don't know what the scope is.
Well, it's in the master plan. I mean...
A master plan, is it adopted? No.
It's not adopted, but it's been promulgated, and your professionals were asked to refer to it.
I just stand by the comments I already made, Mr. Cohen. We'll agree to consider it.
All right, well, I'd like to make it a condition of approval that you would agree to abide by it when it's adopted. It's not going to be something that's going to affect your ability to plan for the future as an institution. It's not going to be, the changes to what kind of bicycle parking is required are not going to impact the site plan.
If it helps, if we do have a new requirement for bike parking for schools, it would only apply to the new construction. So you're only talking about the 40,000 square feet for the field outside. I don't know exactly what the standard would be, so it wouldn't be for the 200,000 plus square foot existing school. It would only, that's typically how we do it, only for the new construction.
Yeah. It's a standard of a number of spaces per square foot that varies for different uses. I don't have the whole thing memorized.
It depends. We haven't really figured out if it's going to be per square foot, per student, there's a variety. That's why we haven't developed it yet, because there are a variety of ways to do it.
It's likely that it will not exceed what's required under LEED if you want to obtain the points for bicycle parking. Of course, under LEED, you always have the option to choose not to do some things and to do other things. If you'll commit to do the point for bicycle parking. I'm just asking that. It's a very simple request. It's not draconian. I think.
how can we ask them to agree to something that we haven't ourselves approved yet? I mean, I certainly get
It's an exchange.
the principle of their argument, but it does seem
They're asking us for
to
special
me...
protection for an extended period.
Well, but
against changes in the zoning ordinance, and I'm saying that...
hang on a document that hasn't been finalized or approved, and it's been around for a while. I mean, I would be happy to make a condition that on their statement that their student body won't increase over that 10 years, but I think that to premise a condition on something that we haven't even seen a final draft of, you may have, but I haven't, and I don't think the rest of the board has, and I think that's really carrying this enthusiasm
If you don't
too far, David.
If you don't like what's ultimately in the plan, you can always vote the plan down. I mean,
Well,
we're not
I'm
going
sure I
to
don't like
approve
it.
anything, right, we're not going to approve anything we don't like. So if we like it,
I think part of my concern is that it's a network plan. So if we are saying there's going to be a 10-year hole in this bike network.
Why are you assuming that the PBS will be hostile to this?
I'm not.
Well, yeah, you are.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying that if they were coming before us next year, we'd require them to put in whatever was required in the plan. And so my concern is if they come in 8 years and we have a lot of the network built up, and I'm not assuming they're going to be hostile to it, but we don't have anything to hang our hat on.
Well, but we also don't have a bicycle plan.
Gail,
Well, I mean, we could always just say, okay, we're not going to do the 10 years. I mean, that's why we're doing, because the choice might be, okay, we'll just do the required 5 years because we're worried about our bike plan. That's.
You also have the landscape committee having to approve certain parts of this at various points, and it would make sense to include a potential bicycle, once we have passed a bicycle plan, to include that along with the landscape committee. But I can't see hanging what I think strikes me as a really reasonable request for the vesting, for the protection, on something that we haven't approved yet. I mean, it just, we want to, we probably will, but I haven't seen the final plan yet. And I don't think most of the people on this board have. You bicyclists have. And
I'm looking at the one that's online.
Well, but it still hasn't been approved.
Right, but if we give them the 10-year, we're just, I think the problem is, we're saying the bike plan isn't going to be operative now for PDS because we're giving them this 10-year. So what we're asking is for PDS to, treat the bike plan as if they didn't have the 10-year extension. Isn't that what we're saying?
Exactly.
Mr. Letizia?
I'm sorry.
So the only thing that would be ordinanced is bike parking. Right. The rest of the master plan is just guidelines, like the rest of the master plan in general. Yeah, good.
Mr. Letizia, would it be acceptable to PDS if language was included in the resolution committing PDS to comply with, whatever we're going to call it, future master plan bicycle element, but that perhaps the board's willing to let you come back to the board if you say, we have great difficulty with it, or it's going to cause a hardship for us. I don't know if that would work for Mr. Cohen and the other board members, but it might be sort of a halfway point with PDS for them to make the commitment, subject to, if it's only bicycle racks, that might be a hard argument for the school to make, to say we're not putting them. But if you reserve the right to come back to make a safety argument that,
Well,
it's not
again, what are we
appropriate.
committing to? The bike racks, that's fine, Mr. Cullen, we'll agree to that, all right? Not worth fighting, debating that, that's fine. If there's going to be a new requirement on bike racks tied to student population or new square footage, fine, we'll agree to do that. But beyond that, I guess I'm unsure, what are we committing to? Is it just an area, an easement to the town, that the town will build a pathway? Is that what you're asking us to do?
That was more Tim Quinn's comment relating to the...
Normally, the way it works in the municipal land use law, if there's a master plan improvement, the town has 1 year to reserve and obtain, basically condemn. Is that what you're asking?
I certainly understand that you don't want to sign on to do something which you have not had an opportunity to see what's included, because it may be one little thing that you can't do that may be minor to us, but it's major to you. However, if in this application it is approved, conditioned on, and add a statement that says that bike racks are built, word it any way you want to, include something that's simple in the bike plan, because I haven't seen it. I don't know what's in it, So if that is what you want, then couldn't that be added as
That's
a
acceptable.
conditioned on that?
We're fine with that.
And no one has to be upset.
Yeah, I think that, the only thing that the protection protects them against is changes in the zoning in the ordinance.
Right.
The only thing that's going to be ordinanced is the bike parking. We're not going to be passing ordinances saying there have to be bike paths on every private development. Okay, the master plan, right?
I think they're concerned that this plan includes designating paths and places on their campus which will be used as part of a greater network of bicycling.
Well, I think, isn't this over with now? Because they agreed to the bike parking, so let's move on.
Okay.
Mr. O'Shea, I don't know we ever got a confirmation. Right now, you do have over 200,000.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
All right, is there anything else? Does somebody want to produce a motion on this?
I'll make a motion to approve with the, now you
Okay, why don't we say subject to the applicant's compliance with the comment memos provided by the staff, with the exception of those items which were identified tonight by the applicant with which they indicated they do not feel compliance is appropriate. And I guess also subject to now an extended vesting period of 10 years
Yes.
for preliminary and final major site plan approval to run concurrently, and the commitment to comply with future bike parking requirements as required by municipal ordinance. Okay.
Okay, is that it? And did someone move that?
I'll second. Oh, Jenny,
Jenny moved it,
and I'll second.
and Julie second. Any further comments? Do you want to call the roll?
Ms. Capizzoli?
Yes.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Miller?
Yes.
Mayor Lambert? Yes. Mrs. Trotman?
Yes.
Mrs. Ullman?
Yes?
Mrs. Gunning?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Mr. Williamson?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate you staying beyond your 11 o'clock. Thank you.
I move to approve, to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor of adjourning?
I'm opposed, no.
You miss.
Nicely done. You next, because I couldn't remember. It's a good thing I didn't.
Thank you, gentlemen. Well done.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
You gotta raise the money. You gotta raise the money.